Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those who are not able to watch live, the webcast is being recorded and will be made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. We received apologies from Mrs. Page and Mr. Frisby, and Mr. King is here to substitute for Mr. Frisby today. So moving on to item 1 on the agenda. The first item is the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 6th of September 2023. I move these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Okay, and moves on to item 2, which is the public question time. I've not been advised of any questions from the public. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order number 7. I've not received any such questions. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Number 5, we have declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest they wish to declare? No. Item 6 is declarations of the party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No. So that moves on to item 7. We haven't received any petitions. Before we take the first substantive item, I propose to change the order of the business from that set out on the agenda. The lead member for Children and Family Services has been invited to attend item 11, the Community Safety Update Report, and needs to leave before 11:30. Therefore, propose that we take item 9, Place Marketing, first as planned, but then move to item 11, the Community Safety Update, and then come back to item 10, the MTFS Monitoring, followed by item 12, Annual Delivery and Performance Compendium. Is that okay? Hello, Mr. Richardson. Yeah.
That's my fault.
We're basically taking the community safety item before the MTFS. There's item 8. Right. So basically, we're moving item 10 before item 9 to allow Mrs. Taylor to leave by 11:30. And Mr. Gillard's apology as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so that moves on to the first substantive item for the day, which is item 8, Place Marketing, Leicester and Leicestershire. Tom Purnell, the Assistant Chief Executive, is introducing the item this morning before handing over to Mike Denby, who is Director of Inward Investment and Place Marketing. Welcome, Tom and Mike, and thank you for joining us today. Tom, do you want to go on?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And I'll be brief before handing over to Mike. The report updates the Commission on the work of the Place Marketing team for Leicester and Leicestershire. The team is jointly funded by the County Council and the City Council and provides a range of services to support tourism, inward investment and place marketing across the area. Brief summaries of those 3 areas of activities are set out in paragraph 6. This activity supports the Council's commitment as set out in the strategic plan to develop a strong economy, and there are references within the plan to the importance of raising the profile of the area, attracting inward investment and supporting tourism. The paper summarises the work of the Place Marketing team in the past year and is the latest in a series of regular updates to the Commission, the last of which was last November. And the paper has taken account of comments made by the Commission last year, including to broaden the key performance indicators reported on, and that's picked up in paragraph 14. The main body of the paper picks out the key strategic issues, but we've also included in the 2 appendices quite a lot of detail about some of the operational activities that are underway so that you are able to see those. The team, whilst it's funded and managed by the City and County Councils and is hosted at the City Council, does work closely in partnership with other agencies, including local business representatives and district councils who are involved in governance arrangements and in delivering local campaigns and supporting investor inquiries. So at this point, I'll introduce Mike, who's the head of the Place Marketing team, and he'll give a brief introduction uncovering some of the key issues picked up in the report.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. So I just wanted to highlight some of the key strategic themes within the document itself. Within place marketing, the overarching aim of our role is to promote the city and county as a place to visit, live and invest. I see the work that we do is almost providing a spine, particularly in a time of austerity. We provide campaigns that different districts can then tap into. It allows them to be part of a bigger campaign, and then they can personalise it for their areas. It's a lot more cost effective for them, and the experience that we've had, particularly over the last 12 months, that's really working well in the current climate. I just want to focus on some of the key projects. The first being a place narrative. We've been working hard over the last, particularly the last 6 months, around developing a shared narrative for Leicester and Leicestershire. Basically what this is how we can lead with our key assets, what makes us distinct as an area compared to the likes of Nottinghamshire or, the Birminghams or the Sheffields of the world. How can we sort of deliver our narrative and that clear brand promise to the outside area? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is attract either investment from outside or visitors from outside. And how can we really pull together our city and county assets so we're getting more bang for our buck? But ultimately, and the most important one, as I see, and as do our stakeholders, how can we really mobilise our businesses and our people so that they're talking up the area as a place to visit, live and invest? So we've undergone quite a big stakeholder engagement process. Some people around the table might have been part of that. We used a third party to deliver that, who were experts in the field of place marketing, a company called Thinking Place. And that was great, having that third party, that impartial organisation to deliver that session, because what it allowed us to do, to hear directly from stakeholders and what their thoughts and feelings are of the area and what they see as the key assets that we need to be leading on in terms of outside messaging. So within the report, it lists the 4 themes, if you like, in terms of our key strategic assets. And our next step is to work through those. We've now got an action plan in place, and we're going to be working through that, and that's going to be things such as delivering ambassador programs, key businesses and organisations and residents as well, and even taxi drivers, people who've got access to a big network to really talk up the area. And our job is to provide them with narrative, like downloadable toolkits and information that they can they can use in the conversations when speaking to people or delivering on a such either a national or an international scale to their network. With regards to the work around inward investment, again, over the last 12 months, working very hard on showing that we are open for business, connecting with the private sector, particularly in the property industry. Obviously, when we talk about inward investment, I've always got to mention it's about investment, but it's not about investment at all costs. We've got to make sure that the investment is quality that we're bringing to the area, and it's about those well-paid, sustainable employment opportunities to the area. The report covers the successes over the last 12 months. Out of the 358 inquiries, many of which we're trying to encourage on a self-serve, particularly some of the smaller inquiries. But the resources that we've converted to 20 on the bigger side. Obviously, in terms of that yield, what that's yield is £493 million worth of investment. It's worth noting that 92% of that is from 2 organisations, 2 companies, but in terms of jobs created, it's just over 1,100 with an average salary rate of 26,000. And again, in terms of the figures and the salaries per year, it's around £33 million to the economy, and about 3 million generated in business rates. And again, all that is detailed within the appendix. We've been working hard to establish locality teams. These things didn't exist 12 months ago, but we want to make sure that, again, we are working hand in glove with the districts to understand what the drivers are, what the key priorities are, and also if there's any issues or any concerns from investors, we want to make sure that we can, again, work closely with districts to resolve those. So we're more about oiling the wheels, really, of any challenges. It might be a challenge or an issue around planning and, people not getting back to the developer, the investor, in a timely manner. So our job is just to work through that. And it tends to be made up of corporate directors, economic growth leads, and somebody from the planning service. But that is now promoted. Those locality teams are promoted externally as well, as almost like the team to resolve any issues or concerns. Again, a lot of work around MIPIN, UK Reef, how we position ourselves to the external audience, again showcasing the area as one to do business. We have increased the amount of private sector monies that we're bringing in to fund these type of activities as well. So the spend is minimal when it comes to public spend, and the vast majority, particularly around the expos that we attend, is now through private sector. Again, to promoting the area, the geography as a place to do business. Moving on to strategic tourism, we continue to deliver the activities in the tourism growth plan. Significant campaigns launched earlier this year, one called Taste the Place, which is all about how we can bring people together using food as a campaign that can unite localities. It's worked really well. It's given the opportunity for areas to personalise that campaign, and again, as opposed to them delivering campaigns themselves, they can be part of that wider campaign. So we've had areas such as Oadby and Wigston that's used some of their UK Shared Prosperity Fund just to do additional videos and additional activities, really to push and promote those schemes. And that hub and spoke model is working really well, I must say. Next year, we're going to be focusing on sustainable tourism and how that activity can support some of the drivers and the strategies that we have around that agenda, and how businesses can do more and how we can market the area as well, because research shows that consumers are really, they're making informed decisions around the sustainable tourism agenda and how we can promote that externally as well. Out of those campaigns. Sector performance, the latest data we've got is from 2022, particularly around tourism. Economic impact is now to 2.07 billion. That's a 27% increase on 2021 data, and that compares to the likes of Nottinghamshire, which is the economy grew by 15.6%. So we see that as a real positive. Visitor numbers up by 8.5% on 2021, still down on pre-pandemic levels, but only slightly. And hotels across the board, whether that be serviced and non-serviced, is up now on pre-pandemic levels, which is good. Employees within the sector is down, it's around 7.4%. However, some of that needs to be attributed to how people and organisations are working post-pandemic as well. Pre-booking is now the thing. Some attractions now, it's all around pre-booking. So automation does play an element of that percentage. And last but not least, probably the most important, most strategic element of our work that we've been working hard on, and we should be submitting this application next month, is there's been a government review of destination management organisations last year. The findings were it's a bit fragmented in terms of the landscape, and we need to do more as DMOs, particularly on a commercial basis. So Visit England and Visit Britain have pulled together a framework that organisations like ours, Place Marketing Team, need to work towards. It's been fair to say there's been challenges in Leicestershire. We've got there was two DMOs in Leicestershire Promotions and ourselves, and we've been working closely with that organisation to carve out who will do what in terms of those roles. So we'll be picking more up on the strategic marketing, and they'll pick up more on the tactical marketing. There's now a memorandum of understanding in place with that organisation. We're working close together to do the best by our businesses and our attractions. And hopefully we should hear back in the new year whether or not we've been successful in that application. And that's just pulling out some of the key highlights of the report, Chair. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mike, for that run through of the report. Does any members have any questions or comments they want to Mike or Tom? Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I just really want to concentrate on the inward investment side, and what I didn't sense from the report was a flavour of, so we've listed the companies there that have come. So out of the inquiries, 62 of them are probably genuine inquiries, because the other ones, as you say, are self-serve, to which we've converted 30% or 33%.
What did we actually do as a council to assist in that? So I'm not sure about what our role in vis-a-vis others. We say we've safeguarded 47 jobs. So how many jobs did we not manage to safeguard? So what was the net position on the jobs front in that respect? In terms of, I mean, I spent half my working career encouraging inward investment into the UK, working with people like the British American Business Council, etc. So what interactions do we have with those organisations? Now, bearing in mind the biggest inward investment generators in this country are the banks, what relationships do you have with the major banks and their inward investment arms? Again, on this one. And I suppose the last one is that we're soon to be a regional combined authority on our doorstep, which is going to have massive spending power, particularly in infrastructure. How are we going to protect Leicestershire against a giant next door who can actually spend on things like roads and that when we can't? And what do you predict the likely impact of the setting up of the regional combined authority to be on our inward investment success going forward? And how are we, I say, going to mitigate that? Because there was nothing in the report about how we're going to meet these head-on clashes going forward.
Okay, so in terms of the level of support for that we've offered to business, I mean, it does vary. What we try and do is get in with the investor as early as possible. So we build up the relationships with the agents if they've not come to us directly, so that we can sort of iron out and find out how we can arrange anything from linking those businesses up to local colleges and universities to access the skills opportunities that exist. It could be with local job centre plus to ensure that our local residents have got to apply for those incentives. New internal colleagues within the work we do with the Department for International Trade. We obviously, some of these opportunities we would do work hand in glove with the Department for Business and Trade. We don't do much in visiting or promoting our offer yet. I mean, that is something that we're looking at doing in the future, but at the moment the budgets don't really allow us to do that. Where we do tend to get a good response is through big sectoral events such as MIPID and UK Reef. UK to area businesses. In terms of the regional combined authority, Tom, you might want to pick up certain elements of that. I think what we're trying to do with the place narrative is really focus on what we do have as an area, make sure that, again, as an area, we can see this almost as a fog that could be confusing business. And what we're trying to do is try and pull people together through that ambassador scheme to promote what we have as an area positively to the outside world. So what we're trying to do is use that place narrative to really drive home the message of the positives of Leicester and Leicestershire.
Want to come back, Mr. Richardson?
Yes, if I can, please. Thank you, Chair. I think perhaps I didn't express myself properly. So, of the county successes you've listed, could you pick one of them and tell me what we did as the county council to ensure they came here? I didn't actually mention about travelling abroad or anything. I mentioned people like the British American Business Council who are based here as well as in the US. So there's no need to go to the US to see them. I never got sent to the US, sadly, to see them. I also mentioned the major banks, which you didn't cover, about our links with them because they are the largest generator of inward investment inquiries in the country, bar none. There was also the point about we protected 47 jobs. How many did we not manage to protect and why, and what was the reasons for those going? So what was the net impact on that one? And you mentioned, I think, something like MIPIN and things like that. So of the recent times we have visited MIPIN, how many actual relocations have we had here as a result of spending that time and money at MIPIN? So which of these successes was a result of a contact made at MIPIN, and how did it come through?
Okay. In terms of the jobs, what we do is, we record the jobs that we've safeguarded. I don't have the data here and now as to the missed opportunities that's moved outside of the area. What we do tend to have is businesses that will move still within the county, but again, we still see that as a win. We are retaining that, retaining those businesses. I don't have the data here and now as to the ones that we've lost. Just
as I can, you were going to pick one of the companies in the list and tell us what we actually did
in terms of what we actually did.
Leicestershire County Council to ensure they came here rather than somewhere else.
Okay, so using an IT company, Cyphered. They are a company that specialise in artificial intelligence. They was looking for a new premise. We weren't able to get them a premise immediately, so we found them some temporary accommodation, sourcing the properties, working directly with the agents, and introducing the company to the agents, because they didn't have some of the bigger organisations have an agent to represent them. They didn't. So what we did is sort of link the two organisations together, and almost coaching them through the process, if you like. Oh, it's the city. All right. Okay. Let's go with Ping USA. In terms of the detail that we did, it's about linking them with the university and the skills and the access to talent through the university, as well as doing that the process of finding them a premise. The principles are still similar in terms of the work that we offer. We try and find a location, allocate them to the university for access to skills.
Sorry, you mentioned Ping. I mean, Ping have been based in Lincolnshire for many years. They used to be one of my customers. So, I can't believe that Ping couldn't find you Loughborough University by themselves. So what did we physically do? So did the inquiry come to us? Did Ping look? How would we contacted? What member of staff here did what to create those 5 jobs at Loughborough? Look, we could have missed out on if our member of staff hadn't been involved. So what I'm trying to find is, what is the direct involvement of the county in this area? Yeah. Also, you were going to pick one that was as a result of attending MIPIN. So I'm trying to work out a cost-benefit analysis of going to MIPIN, about jobs created for the money and time spent, and things of that nature. And are we still intending to carry on with such things as MIPIN? Because I thought we had decided as a council a couple of years ago that we were going to cease attending MIPIN.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of MIPIN, the best example on MIPIN was around identifying issues around planning, particularly for housing development, a development for apartments. Now that is not landed yet. That investment's not landed. MIPIN, was only in March this year, so that's currently going through the planning process. I would probably say that that's the biggest opportunity. We've had, again, the deal's not been done, but we've had an offer for this one's a city building, a council building that they were looking to sell. So we've had an offer in from MIPIN as well, but the deal's yet to be done. So there are irons in the fire from MIPIN, but I can't give you it was my first MIPIN this year. I can't give you an example that's actually landed since then.
We've been going to MIPIN for several years. There must have been at least one example as a result of going to MIPIN that we've actually attracted in with investment. Otherwise, who's been doing the cost-benefit analysis for the last several years to say this was the benefit? I appreciate you weren't involved, but there must have been some benefit or some income into the county. And again, there was the further question about Are we working with the major banks now in with investment arms and those sort of things?
I mean, just in terms of MIPIM, we've sort of reviewed our attendance constantly over previous years. There have been times in the past where there was perhaps political involvement in going to MIPIM. That happened once or twice, and that's a decision that was decided not to continue. More recently, it's been the head of strategic property who's attended, and he's done that with a view to seeking interest from house builders, for example, in sites that the county council is promoting, or in identifying opportunities where the council might be able to generate a return from some investment. What I can't do now is say whether there's been a direct investment in the county, but I think that sort of soft marketing, if you like, activity is seen as really important to promoting the county assets. And the cost of that person going to MIPIM is we're talking in the sort of high hundreds, low thousands in terms of the overall cost, plus staff time, obviously, which is felt, given the scale of those investments and those opportunities, is considered to be a worthwhile investment of time.
Morgan, did you?
Thank you, Chair. So I obviously raised a question last year about MIPIM. I through my private organisation, had attended MIPIM for the best part of a decade, and I expressed, I think this time last year, my personal view from having spent best part of a decade sending my staff, including myself, and the costs associated with that are not minimal. Particularly not only the travel costs, but also the accommodation, plus the fees for attending, etc., etc., etc. But I have to say, personally, my organisation found it extraordinarily difficult to justify the ongoing costs, because it is quite significant, both in a personal position as well. It's interesting your comment about residential, because I have to say my experience of the sort of people that used to attend MIPIM, they weren't UK house builders. If they were attending MIPIM, it wasn't for investments that they actually were doing in the UK. Certainly, city centre developments, high-rise developments, etc. I could see some of the institutions that attended MIPIM potentially would be interested, but I suspect they're probably more for the city rather than necessarily us in the county area. There are other events. I mean, you listed some of the other things that we do actually support based in the UK. Actually, some of those from talking to people in the industry actually have been very favourably reviewed and compared to MIPIM. And I have to say, I think it's sensible for us as an organisation to concentrate on some of those, given what we are doing in the county area rather than necessarily compared to the city, because there are different opportunities in the city in development terms than possibly elsewhere. And I can quite understand why we would seek to support some of those other events. And I have to say, great opportunities to actually link with some of the other, we've talked about development, but some of the other campaigns. Taste the Place, I have to say, is a lovely descriptive campaign that you can see being highly successful for a lot of businesses across the county area and the city, and I think demonstrates a sort of a really quite a refreshing way of actually promoting the assets that we have. And to be frank, actually some of those are also attractive to businesses. So having been involved in Leicestershire, particularly around the Loughborough and the Charnwood area for the last decade on contacts with businesses, what we sell to businesses is not necessarily the financial benefits, it's actually the quality of life of businesses locating in the area, access to parks and open spaces, access to good schools, something that actually sets us apart to other areas. It's not often always just the hard reality of, relocating to us because we've got great financial offer, because actually there are financial offers that are equally as effective as Terry talked about elsewhere that are going to be on the doorstep that are probably as good, if not better. But we have other things that can benefit. Number one sports university in the world. People like Ping, I suspect, are well aware of the quality of Loughborough. It is literally universally understood within the sports field for what it can do. But I think it really is important. We've got other reports coming up that obviously set out the financial constraints and problems for us as an authority to make sure that actually we are really concentrating on the return on investment, not only for us as an authority, but also for what we're actually doing for our community, both businesses, but also residents. And that means that asking very hard questions about, what are we doing that's maybe not statutory, but actually has other benefits, making sure that we're really clear about what impact we have as an authority, that every pound that we spend, what impact does that have and what return does that have for us as an authority, but also for our communities. There are bits of this report which really paint a very good picture. There are other bits that maybe, as Terry has outlined, which are maybe we need to really have reassurance that a lot of the stuff that's being listed isn't just happening anyway, rather than actually it's our added value and what we're actually doing that really makes the difference. But yeah, the comments on MIPIM, I genuinely, I absolutely understand that there is a sort of a historical sort of, MIPIM being the big property conference everyone should be part of. But to be frank, from talking to people I know within the industry who are still, that they have reviewed their attendance at MIPIM because they see other events in the UK as being more effective and more relevant. And I would really urge us as an authority to spend our money probably on those events in the UK rather than actually MIPIM. Talking to somebody last week who was actually lived in Cannes, worked in the hospitality industry, that they actually described MIPIM as being the worst event that Cannes hosted each year, not for attendance and how much money it put into the coffers, but actually just on what it was like to be in Cannes when MIPIM was actually taking place. And I have to say, unfortunately, that doesn't fare well on some of the people that actually attend. And I'm not the British people, because actually there are these days a lot more Russian and Middle Eastern and Far Eastern money that is attracted to MIPIM. Long gone are the days when it used to be just a UK construction industry event. Okay, thank you.
No, fair comment. And you're absolutely right. Since UK Reef, in terms of the balance and what we're doing in terms of our activities, as is heavily weighted towards UK Reef. When you do look at MIPIM, I know Tom's mentioned it, in terms of the number of people, there's a couple of people that attend. We do it on a very small scale. The majority of that is our private sector partners. They do invest quite a lot in MIPIM. So what they will do is promote the area, Leicester and Leicestershire, as a place to do business. They're spending quite a lot of money on that as well. So there's a part that we need to be out there with them, given the fact they are investing in that and taking advantage of their connections and the people that they're inviting to that event. But you're right, we're doing it on a small scale. And we do put the majority of our investment in UK Reef because you can get more bang for your buck. So we've got bigger one-to-many events. So if I give you a flavour at MIPIM, using some of that private sector money might be attracting 50, but yet we're attracting like 200-300 at UK Reef because we are really sort of investing in that marketing opportunity. So I agree with your comments, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mike. Mrs. Hack.
Thank you. I've a couple of bits on the place marketing element and a bit on tourism. So I can either take them separately or I can come back. It's up to you, Chair. I think just taking a little bit of a change of direction of what we've had so far. I think when we're looking at the county successes, my real concern is from a strategic point of view, our USP is basically just logistics. What else do we do? I think that is a real worry, because when we think about environmental sustainability, these jobs come with a huge amount of land take, the economic cost, the land that's used to generate 40 jobs, 100,000 square feet for 40 jobs. I bet they barely see one another, in that kind of space. It worries me a little bit that we have this USP of logistics and logistics alone, and how do we as a inward investment part of the city and the county consider that we're more than that.
Yeah.
You know, I was involved in economic development a number of years ago in Leicester and Leicestershire, and at that moment of time we were really marketing creative industries, because that's what came out of DMU, what came out of Leicester University and out of Loughborough. Creative industries was massive for us. It was a real growth area, and you've got one or two in here in terms of new tech, what's next, what's coming next. So I really wanted to sort of understand about how do we as Leicester and Leicestershire shift our USP, because I think, you know, pardon the pun, we're getting boxed in logistics and logistics alone. I suppose the other element is, what's the balance between of investment in. It's not just about roads, although you can see that what we're generating is lots more traffic in the county, and that can't be part. What are we directing in terms of what we need in terms of land for use for office, different kind of facilities, labs, those kinds of, what are we doing? Because at the moment it feels like strategic development is sheds, and again sheds alone, which doesn't generate the economic great jobs that we're really looking for. The second bit on tourism, one of the things that you know, what's our biggest barrier? Certainly, I sit on highways and transport scrutiny as well as doing this, and one of the things that I think is quite interesting is actually just how difficult it's to get around. And lots of people use Sunday as their leisure time, and actually we have no infrastructure on a Sunday. You know, we don't even run our park and rides on a Sunday. And we mentioned in the tourism bit about bringing in the Radio 2 event just in September gone. And I understand the organisers didn't want to use the park and ride, but then we had a problem on the Midlands Main Line, and nobody could get out of Leicester. So what are we doing to try and build those things together? Because business inwardly invest because of the environment, because of what we create. If we keep cutting key services such as bus infrastructure, and we chug up our roads by logistics companies, how do we move ourselves forward?
I'll pick up in terms of the quality of jobs, you're absolutely right in terms of that land take, particularly around logistics. The reason why we set up the locality teams is to ensure that we're working with the local areas to hit their objectives on what they want to see from their area. A lot of this is devised from a local plan, so ultimately it has been has been allocated in the local plan. Policy does prescribe for density of housing, but it is difficult on the commercial development. There's no policy there. What I am aware of is districts have commissioned a warehousing study, and what that's going to be there for is to agree, what are the most appropriate areas for this. So there is work underway already to do that. I suppose for us, it's about trying to do what we can to, if an area, for example, we're dealing with an investor and it's not right for the area, the reason we work closely with them is, we can sort of manage those conversations and dissuade them from a particular area, but there is no strict policy within our area to say that you've got to have so many jobs per square metre, that kind of thing. But in terms of the warehousing study, that will be more around agreeing where are the most appropriate areas for things such as for warehousing. In terms of, again, the work that we're doing around the quality jobs as well, you talk about office. It's a challenge at the moment because particularly office, it needs some kind of stimulant. The bill prices have gone up significantly. The interest rates have gone up significantly as well. So we've been looking at different models on how, as areas we can stimulate that investment, working with the likes of banks to look at different funding models to make that work. The numbers don't look great at the moment. We've looked at things such as like income strips, how you can make those work. And what we can do with the sector, again, to try and oil the wheels and move things forward. But at the moment, when we're looking at things such as office, it is challenging at the moment. So we're trying to work with the owners of Grade B office stock and try and encourage them to, to improve the quality, to try and get that up to Grade A office space. But it is a significant challenge at the moment, particularly around the Grade A office space. And I'll let Tom pick up the question around barrier on an infrastructure in tourism.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Well, place marketing team activity has to sort of take place within the context within which we're living at the moment, and obviously there is a difficult public funding situation for local authorities and for others too, and the council needs to make difficult financial decisions which impact on things like bus services, park and ride, and others. And there's and the council seeking to secure funding where it can from the government and other agencies for that infrastructure, and through fair funding for a better funding settlement for the council. But the context is the context, and the place marketing team is there to make the best, if you like, of the assets that we do have, and to improve those and to promote those, and to make sure that we get as much inward investment as possible, despite those constraints, and also support or encourage visitors to come into the area. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. It makes it more difficult. I think most areas are experiencing similar issues, and it's why it's important that we get the best bang for the buck that we can out of the place marketing work that we do.
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned Grade A office accommodation. In my working life, I relocated our quite small, modest office last year. We could buy or we could rent. We had the capital to buy if we wanted to. In Leicestershire, there was one property in the whole of Leicestershire that we could buy, and in terms of the quality we were looking for, I think there was probably 3, and it was on the same estate in the Meridian Business Park. That was it. That was all that was available in terms of good quality office accommodation. It's actually pretty poor out there if you want smaller amounts of space. But, we leased about 2,500 square foot for roughly 48 staff on a hybrid working model. So it's not, it's not small. That's high quality is a real barrier for Leicester and Leicestershire, and I think if we really we're really thinking that the work that you're doing with that's pretty poor quality needs to be uplifted. I think also there needs to be a bit of work done with owners of accommodation, because they're not massively keen on upping their quality in terms of environmental improvements. They want their renters to pay for it when they own the asset. They should be paying for that upgrade. So there is that bit of complexity. Sorry, if I could just come back. Terry mentioned the East Midlands mayor scenario. What impact is the Freeport having in the rest of Leicestershire in terms of displacement, and are we finding that yet?
We're not seeing that yet. We're seeing obviously the East Midlands Freeport as an opportunity, and we're working with East Midlands Freeport to showcase our businesses the opportunities that exist from that. We're not seeing it as a displacement and people moving from our area to others as it currently stands. And like I say, it's within this document as well. We're working hand in glove with the East Midlands Freeport, so that we're sharing what's happening with businesses and where the conversations lie across geography, and that's the best we can do at this stage.
Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you. So just to pick up, so you covered some of the points others have covered some of the points I was going to ask about. So first of all, what I wasn't really, what's not in the report, although it does mention how much the county council is paying, which is just under 200,000. Presumably that's the cost of the 2 members of staff who are seconded and the 60k that we put in, but wasn't clear what the total budget is for this this organisation, this department that between the city and county. Maybe you could just put a number on that. How many people totally work in this group that you're director of?
Okay, so total budget is around 650,000. About putting on cost.
Well, it says in the report it's 198,000.
Right.
So that's fine. And how many people altogether?
7.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That just gives me context. So just then looking at the what you've talked about, you reported on the inquiries. That's less than 6% conversion rate from all the inquiries that come in through the website. And I'm just wondering, 5.6, how does that compare with other similar types of organisations and areas nationally? That sort of less than 6% conversion rate.
It is, yeah, 5% in terms of conversion.
Yeah.
Obviously, from that, we've got inquiries that are still in the hopper.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, okay, go on, yeah.
So from that, we've got inquiries that are still in the hopper. So around 60% of those inquiries we deal with between 6 and 18 months on average. And it also includes the smaller ones, the ones that might be just somebody looking for less than 5,000 square foot. And what we've got is an online system that facilitates that. So what we tend to do is from those inquiries, we'll pick out the bigger ones and focus on those. But what we'll try and do is use automation to allow people to find the building particulars and contact the agents. What we've got is one full-time member of staff working on the inward investment for the county. So what we've got to try and do is sort of focus on the bigger inquiries as a
Of those 7 staff altogether, only one person works on inward investment for the county. Is that what you just said?
That's correct.
Okay. So then taking what you've reported, you've said that 453 million last year came from 2 investments. So working that out, 40 million came from the other 18, which is an average of 2.2 million. So then looking at what you've just said, they're pretty small kind of levels of investment. Obviously you haven't given the minimum, or we haven't got any data about what the minimum level, what the smallest level of investment was, or the smallest thing that the inward investment team was looking at or helped with. But I am a little concerned that maybe some of these things would have happened anyway, and I'm just wondering exactly what has been, apart from having some very nice campaigns. And that's great. Campaigns are nice and they make everyone feel great, because saying what a great place Leicester and Leicestershire is to come and live, work and everything else. And that's great. But I'm not really clear from the report as to why some of these organisations have come here. If we're not able to offer financial inducements, which clearly we're not, then what is the feedback on why they chose us above, I don't know, the north of England or the northwest or the south? What was the key reason that some of them came here? And then earlier on in your talk presentation, you talked about this is about high value jobs. Well, an average salary of 26,000, I wouldn't classify as a high value job. I'd say that's just above. That's probably average earnings, to be honest. Probably slightly below. So I'm a little bit concerned we're not really getting high value jobs. What we're getting some jobs, and there might be some high value jobs in amongst, but the vast majority of jobs would, if it's an average of 26,000 and whatever, are not high value. So what are you doing to address that? Because look at the pipeline, what you've given us, and what Mrs. Hack said. Actually, a lot of those are logistics operators in one or another. Not many high value organizations there or things there. And then that brings me to this warehousing, what you call warehousing, which I'm sure the logistics industry wouldn't be very happy about you calling it that. So let's call it logistics and distribution study. Is that a new study on top of the study that's already been carried out about 2 years ago on behalf of Leicestershire councils. So is this or is this an update to that study? I'm just trying to understand what that is, because those in the room will know that logistics in Leicestershire is kind of, despite what anyone might think, kind of is only going to happen in a few areas because of the the road and rail infrastructure. And the topography. It is pretty difficult. So and one obvious thing that's not mentioned in this report at all is Magna Park and the huge growth that's taken place there. And I'm just wondering how you are engaging with big operators like that, who have their kind of own kind of processes for bringing in new tenants and new businesses onto their site, and don't actually, I'm not sure if you're having much interaction with them. So maybe you could explain that. Sorry, I've just thrown you a lot at you, but and then finally, this thing about office space. Now, it's interesting because the other week I sat here and we had a planning application from the county council to put in small business units at Airfield Business Park in Market Harborough, which I declare as in my division, and I was a member of that committee and I did vote in favour of it, but on the premise that office space couldn't be built and let to anyone. You just said earlier that we need office space, grade A office space. So the county council itself had outlined permission for a grade A office space to construct at Airfield Business Park, quite a substantial one, and it's chosen not to do that. So I'm just wondering whether you've had conversations with the county council about why they chose to do that, to rescind, move away from creating office space, which you've just told us is in high need and high demand, which is contrary to what the report said, which was put before, I think, Cabinet a few weeks ago, when they were told, no, there isn't high demand for that, and we can't make any money out of it, so we're going to go for B1, B2, or whatever it is.
B1, B2, B8.
That's it. So maybe you could explain that contradictory sort of statements that you've just made.
Okay.
I appreciate you not speaking on behalf of the county council.
No. In terms of B1, B2, B8, it's very profitable. Having that as your planning opportunities to move into B1, B2, B8. All I can comment is on the research that we've had done around grade A office space. And what we've found since the pandemic, and then the research suggests, is people are moving from much bigger floor plates, as you would expect, to much smaller floor plates. But what they're not doing is reducing the quality. So whilst they're reducing it down, they're almost trying to compete with people who are working from home, and they're going to try and get people back into the office again. So what they're doing is going for better quality at grade A office space. And the challenge that we're facing is the fact that other areas such as Birmingham, you look at their grade A office market, and also the likes of Nottingham as well, is they've stimulated the market in some areas. The authorities have bought into that, might have put income strips in, putting the name on the head lease to try and stimulate the market. And they've done that pre, the costs going up on build costs and interest rates. And because you've got immediately available, they call it speculative builds, it's easier to get away. It's easier to get out there. So on that basis, we're not finding, the comments that you've suggested from the locality. We are finding that's the challenge that we've got at the moment, which is why we're trying to do what we can with the grade B stock, because at the moment, our ceiling price of £1 per square foot isn't quite there. So we need around £30 a square foot. And the last one, using the city centre as an example, it's around £23.5 per square foot. So there's that gap, and that's where the challenge is at the moment. But the demand is there for grade A office space, and ideally, the more immediately available, the better.
Thanks for the report. On the face of it, it looks as though there is some positive work coming through. Very difficult with such a small team to influence beyond a certain level. And the reality of it is, from what I can see, these companies are coming to the area, will have done their own research, they will have made their own investment appraisal and decide whether it is right for them. The only influence we can really have is, I suppose what's been said today, in a perfect world, we'd have a mix of business within Leicestershire, but it isn't an ideal world, and there is strong competition from other areas. What you can achieve with, I think you said had a total team of 10. The report actually refers to 2 people with a budget of 200,000. But I suppose the majority of questions that are coming through are really questioning, are we getting value for money? And it is very difficult to actually prove that. And I suppose the one question you could ask is, if it didn't exist, would Leicestershire have attracted the amount of inward investment that it has? So I think we've got to be realistic. I think the questions that have been asked today are fair, reasonable, but also from the other point of view, we've got to realistically be aware that 2 people or 10 people, it's going to be difficult. It is the companies will not be influenced beyond, they will just be very pragmatic about what they're doing and why they're coming to Leicestershire. And our level of influence is going to be limited. There's only so much you can do. I mean, it isn't a question, but just really a comment. I think we can all say what we would like. I think we'd all say what we want for Leicestershire, but actually achieving that is a load more difficult than that. It's a work in progress. And I suppose the nub of what's been said this morning amounts to, are we getting value for money for 650,000? Or is it really worthwhile doing what we're doing? Would anything change if we didn't have it? And I suspect the answer probably is yes, it would change if we didn't have it. If there was no effort put in, if you don't put any effort in, there's no reward either. I mean, this is evolving work, but I think the sort of real consensus is, are we getting value for money? How much influence can we realistically have? And I'll leave it at that, just to ask for your comments on that.
I think obviously in marketing, it's the hardest thing to track in terms of that return on investment, and we do the best we can with what we've got in terms of the measures. But ultimately, we're talking about account management and investment in marketing. On the account management side, I could pull, or you could tell me, right, bring your top 10 agents in, and they'd all speak positively about our service. Because what we've got to do is, you're right, when a business makes a decision to move somewhere, they're driven by data. The data's already telling them where the hotspot areas are in terms of where they need to locate their business, where their customers are, the drive times, if it's logistics, or where the skills base are, if it's high quality skilled employment opportunities. But what our job is to do is work directly with the agents, or if they've come to us direct, to do what we can. Because what they've then got to do, they've got a certain time frame, they've got a certain budget, and what we've got to do is do what we can to connect the dots, join up that business to different supply chain organisations as well, so they benefit from that investment. So the work that we do is very much around having that portfolio of other businesses that we can work with and connecting the different parties. And you're right, that is hard to be able to do that. Anecdotally, we can get lots of testimonials from our partners that we work with. I know Magna Park was referenced. Work with them on a regular basis. Again, we've got an issue with planning. We need to speak to this person. What do we do? And a lot of that is about that problem solving. Again, to ensure that if a business is considering 3 different properties, we want them to choose our area over someone else. So the more we're on the ball and the smarter we are working in partnership with our authorities and the private sector, the more chance we've got of them choosing our area. And again, that's the bit that's really hard to be able to pound shillings and pence monitor.
Thank you.
Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much, Chair. Regarding the tourism side of this, to what extent do we monitor or can we monitor where people are coming or are travelling from to come to Leicester and Leicestershire specifically? So I've been looking on the Visit Leicester website, the top destinations there. I think all but 3 of them are probably within an hour's drive of of here, and in fact, two of them are Leicester and Loughborough. So are we primarily focusing on getting local people out to what we have? Or are we focusing more on getting people from outside the area in with the impact that has? So obviously, whilst we want to promote Leicestershire as a great tourist location for its own sake, really what we're trying to do is get some money into the local economy. And to that extent, it's quite a different question. So if I go to Bradgate Park, I might park in the car park. I might end up having to park outside on the road, but unless I spend money, I'm not contributing to the local economy. I'm just causing problems, if you see what I mean. Whereas, if you know, it's then to what extent do I then encourage me to spend money there, you know, somewhere else? If I'm traveling further, I maybe get a meal, I maybe get a hotel. So again, what I would spend as a tourist is quite different compared to if I'm going locally to further away.
Yeah.
So I just wondered what sort of work's been done to look at that and where the focus is.
Okay. So the priority for our work is always about outsiders in terms of that primary audience that we're trying to attract. So when we do particularly our social media marketing and advertising, we target the drive time areas for those individuals to try and attract them to our area. Of course, we've got the element of promoting all what's great and good about our area to our own residents, and we do that as well, particularly around events. So the recent bonfire events, there's lots of information on that, and we promote that. You can buy tickets through the website as well. So of course we're facilitating our own residents so that they're aware and they're experiencing what's available to them. But our priority is always outside in, just as it is for inward investment as well, and all of our marketing links back to that. And that is why the campaigns are all about promoting the whole of the county, looking at what the assets are to get more bang for your buck, because more bang for your buck attracts more people, and we've got more individual hooks to get that visitor to the area.
Any more questions or comments on this item? No, thank you to everybody who's contributed. It's been a good discussion on this, and thank you to Mike for answering lots of questions, and Tom. Moves us on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 10, which is on pages 65 to 76 of your agenda pack, which is the Leicestershire County Council Community Safety Update. Sharon Cook, the Assistant Director of Children and Family Services, introducing this item, and she's joined by Gurjit Samra Ray, Community Safety Manager, and Mrs. Taylor, the lead member, has also in attendance for this item. So thank you for attending, and Sharon, when you're ready, if you want to launch this item, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm here on behalf of the Director to present the paper that outlines for the committee the work undertaken by the Council's community safety team, of which Gurjit joins me today as the service manager of the team. And the report covers in detail the work of the team that helps deliver the duties and responsibilities of the local authority under the Community Safety Strategy 22-26. So the report gives the detail of the policy framework for this work, and then the detail of the actual work that's been covered by the team. Presenting the paper, obviously Gurjit is available to give an answer in more detail on some of the actions of the team, but we're both happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Did you want to say things? No. Okay, so open to members now. Has anyone got any questions, comments on this report? Mrs. Hack.
Just a really quick one, actually. On the report of the annual update we got last year, there was a reference to the amount of refuge capacity we had within domestic abuse services. And I know in Leicestershire we're under capacity where we should be. What impact is that having, and what what work have we been pursuing to try and either improve capacity or provide alternatives within that piece of work? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a really pertinent question, actually. We're working on that right now. It's a piece of work that we're looking at. So we're literally next week launching a procurement process to tender dispersed housing and further refuge accommodation. So we've split it into 3 lots. One is generic, and that will include accessible units, so for people with disability, older people, bigger units, so for larger families to enable families with older boys. Refuge can't take boys over 14, and units that will enable pets to come in, because we know that's a barrier to victims leaving. Another lot is a smaller lot specifically for Black, Asian, multi-ethnic families, and then a 3rd lot for male victims. So we can update you on that as that work progresses. But and we're looking at that for 2 years, and then further 2 years if the funding comes through from Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities.
Mr. King. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. So the question I had was just around the domestic abuse reduction strategy, and so there are kind of a couple of things here. So first of all, county being tier 1 has responsibility for one aspect, information and advice, but on the other aspect, in terms of providing direct housing for people who need to be accommodated, that then falls on to districts. I'm just wondering how that interface is working, in terms of, is it working well, can it be improved, or, you know, second thing really was, what sort of numbers are we talking about in terms of how many people are we supporting? Obviously, I've because I only got asked to sub in yesterday, haven't had a lot of time to read the reports, but I couldn't actually see any numbers referred to, so they're kind of volume, you know, I mean, obviously we don't want there to be lots of people, that would be, but equally, you know, are we being effective in those that are being supported? You know, in how we're helping them, and that's not something I could easily see, but maybe it is in the report and I just can't find it. So grateful if you could help me on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so the duty does sit on the tier 1, so us as a county council, and in terms of the housing function, it's housing, homelessness sits with districts and boroughs. We have clear links with the districts and boroughs through all the partnership work. I also attend the Chief Housing Officer group, so we have discussions there. We have link workers, so whilst the county council receive an amount of funding from DLUT, the districts and boroughs also receive an amount, and most of them are funding housing link workers, and then I bring them together and we have discussions around the support for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. We have seen an increase in presentations of homelessness at district level, and that is causing some financial concerns at the locality. We're using some of the Department of Levelling Up money to work through that and look at options. So, for example, where it's safe to do so, try and enable victims to stay in the home, and look at rehousing a perpetrator rather than ousting a family out of a home. So there is a lot of work being done. In terms of figures, it's quite fragmented in terms of the support and the commissioning for support for victims. So the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner fund a lot of it, Public Health fund some of it, we in Children's fund some of it. So it's quite fragmented, and we're working at the minute to bring a report, a dashboard together, bringing all that data together so it's in one place. So at the minute it's kind of all over the place, but that will be available by the next time we come to scrutiny.
Thank you. I was pleased to hear the work that's sort of going on in terms of getting a situation where pets and elder children can go into refuge or get, you know, accommodation for those. Through my day job working for Jane Hunt MP in primarily, but also in previous roles I've had at Charnwood, I've seen the impact that pets are very really part of a family, and that's especially true for children maybe that have been in that vulnerable situation. I've come across cases in the past where you know, a child, I'm thinking of one specific case that I won't name names, where a child has been moved from one place to another place. The only constant he had in his life was his pet dog, who then the local authority said, no, you can't, we can't have the dog. And obviously at that point, it's devastating for the family. So I just really wanted to not a question, but a comment, and to say I think that is very important and isn't a peripheral point. I think it is essential. My question is actually on something different though. It's to do with the key achievements, and it talks about the Ask for Angela campaign, which I think is a really interesting initiative that I know has been going on across the country, and I think maybe internationally for years. To what extent do people, and specifically, I guess, girls, get educated about that in sort of schools? Because a good age to sort of, you know, if you're sort of 16, 17, to really know that this exists could be a life changer for you. And it's sort of, there are posters, I know, at pubs and bars and clubs and so forth, but again, unless you've looked at those things, to what extent do we proactively, to schools and colleges proactively say, this is what it is, this is how it works, this is what you need to do in that circumstance, because it literally could save your life. And I guess as a mirror point, do we know that bars and clubs are teaching staff to do this as part of their induction? Because it's all well and good having this campaign, telling everyone about it, but if I've just joined and I don't know who Angela is, then it falls down.
Thank you. Yes, a really good point. The Ask for Angela campaign started quite small, and we in Leicestershire were quite quick to roll it out. So we had training in place, and we had all the venues that were promoting that on our website. It's kind of taken on a life of its own now. As you say, it's gone national, and the kind of pub association has picked it up, because I've been to places where it's not a Leicestershire County Council thing anymore. It's bigger than that. We have heard stories of people have gone to the bar and asked for Angela and been told Angela doesn't work there. So we are looking at training and ensuring that where there are posters up, that the staff are aware of it, because as you say, it's really important. If somebody's in danger, they don't need to hear that, you know, there isn't an Angela there. So it is a really important point. In terms of the schools and young people, we work with a violence reduction network, and there's a Mentors in Violence Prevention programme that is being rolled out across Leicester, and Rutland, and it looks at lots of different things, including violence against women and girls, serious violence, knife crime, drug misuse, etc. So within that, we do talk about what's available and the support that's available. And there's also, you may have seen some posters where there's a campaign that we've worked with the Violence Reduction Network on about inappropriate language. So if your mate is speaking inappropriately about women, how to challenge that, and that kind of links into this work. So there is a lot going on. There's a new website for young people and parents and carers. So we are doing a lot of work to educate young people, and we'll continue to do that going forward. And the other bit of that is we're training young people to be peer mentors, and we find that that's more impactful than adults kind of educating young people.
Thank you, Chair. I'd say at the outset, I think this is extremely valuable bit of work. I think it's work we do exceedingly well, and I think it's an area where the two tiers of local government work really well together. So my question is just a small one on, just to get my one grey cell into understanding. I've looked at the chart in paragraph 42 of the expenditure. I didn't know if that was cost per year or if it was the cost for the 2 year or with the 1 year extension. So I couldn't work out what the cost related to. So if there is a 2 year fixed term, is that the cost for 2 years? If there's a 2 years plus 1 year extension, is that the cost for 3 years?
Apologies for that confusion. It is actually for 1 year.
So if it's for 1 year, then.
No, sorry, it's for 2 years. got that wrong because I just looked at the top line.
So that was my question. I couldn't then work that back to paragraph 37 of where the funding's coming from, because again, it would have been useful if there had been a total at the bottom of this with total by year, but the total here comes to, I don't know, about 1.8 million if my little finger on my calculator worked fine, which then is significantly less than the 2-year funding above it. So if you add all these up, I think it comes to 1.874 million or something, unless I've hit a wrong figure. So I'm just trying to correlate of, does this match back to paragraph 37, and how will I know it matches back to paragraph 37? So if it could be clearer, or if perhaps we could get a clearer chart sent to us, that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, noted. Apologies for that. So it is the DLUP funding that we refer to here. So these are the individual projects and the expenditure. What isn't in there is the what I spoke about, the tendering for the dispersed and refuge accommodation, because we haven't actually allocated, although we've allocated it, we haven't actually got a contract and a provider yet. So we can do that. We can circulate those figures.
Thank you. That's very cool. I'd just like to work out what we're spending back to what we're getting in.
Do we have any more questions, comments on this item? No. Sharon Gurgit, Mrs. Taylor, did you have anything else to add on this?
No, nothing else from me. I think just picking up on what Gurgit said, the bystander work we're doing, I think, is really important. And I think domestic abuse and violence against girls and women is everyone's business. So I think the bystander work that we're doing is really important for people to call out their own family and friends if they see them acting in a way that they shouldn't be. So that's really the key for us at the moment.
Thank you to members for comments and questions. Which moves us on to the next item, which is back to item 9, which is the medium-term financial strategy monitoring report. Declan Keegan, Director of Corporate Resources, is introducing the report and is joined by Simone Hines, Assistant Director, and Mr. Brecken, Lead Member for Resources, is also in attendance. Thank you for attending, and Declan, please go ahead.
May I just pass over to Simone? I'll give you sort of a bit of the introduction.
Thank you. Good morning. So this report sets out the revenue and capital monitoring for the council as at period 6. So it's halfway through the year at this stage. The revenue monitoring position shows an overall net overspend of £10 million for projected for the year to date. And that's driven primarily by social care, demand, cost and complexity. And there is quite a lot of detail set out in the report around that, both for children's and adult social care. And some of the issues we're seeing in those services. There is a summary in the table at paragraph 7 as well, which again shows the issues for children's and adult social care and the forecast overspend in each of those for the year. What we are then seeing is increased investment income and also some savings in our capital financing costs, which are helping to offset some of those service pressures. So broadly, we are seeing cost increases across services, particularly social care, and inflationary pressures in the region of 20 million. But then we do have investment income and other sort of corporate savings that are helping to offset those pressures to bring that down to that net position of £10 million. The report then also details the capital programme monitoring for the year as well. That's from section 64 onwards in the report. That shows slippage of just over £6 million forecast for the year, which is about 4.5% compared to the budgeted programme for the year. The main areas of slippage there are the vehicle replacement programme, which is just slight delays in delivery of vehicles. I think orders have now been placed. And then some minor slippage on the workplace strategy programme and the school places programme as well, but that is quite small level of slippage there. The report then also goes through the Investing in Leicestershire programme outcome so far, and just to confirm that the overall return on that programme for the year is forecast to be 3.3%, and that is in line with the budget. So we are expecting to receive income of about £7.6 million for the year, which is in line with the budget for the year. The recommendation is for the Commission to note the report, but as I said, there is a lot of detailed variance information in there, so happy to take any questions that the Commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Members, Mr.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, really. I know from chairing adults communities, which I only did on Monday, and from talking to our deputy leader earlier today, that we are still struggling in our negotiations with the ICB regarding payments for care, which would normally be made by the NHS in other areas, which don't seem to be happening here. So I would just urge again a further portfolio holder to, I'm sure the Cabinet are, to work as collectively as they can to put as much pressure on the ICB as possible to bring us into line with other counties. And I know the directors in both those services are working day and night to achieve that. Secondly, on the vehicles, I just wonder what sort of vehicles we're buying these days, particularly in relation to our commitment to be carbon neutral. So, are we seeing increased costs? Are we still buying diesel vehicles? Have we looked at running those vehicles on different fueling than is otherwise there? But the bit that gives me, which I can't get my head around, and I'm sure somebody will explain it to me, is the section in the capital budget on predominantly ways of working. Now, it may be that what we need as a Scrutiny Commission is an update on ways of working, because the narrative in there doesn't seem to bring anything to me. So it implies we're losing income because we haven't done A, B and C, but I still haven't seen a chart against, are we still going in the right direction in improving our office accommodation and renting it out? Should we be making greater use of areas of the campus for other things, particularly with some of the capital expenditure we've got to make if we could gain some capital receipts rather than revenue receipts? And I think particularly with the debate that took place on Monday at Adults Communities about the need for a collections hub and how we're going to fund those sort of things. So I'm singularly confused on the ways of working, because the narrative there, if I can find it, sort of seemed a bit strange. If I just bear with me, I'm sure I will get there in a minute. Yeah, no, I never find you never find it when you're looking for it, do you? But there you go. So it's like we've got climate change, energy incentives, slippages, heat decarbonisation plan, which I know nothing about. Workplace strategy, property cost, changing strategy agreed by the Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Resources. Well, what change in strategy? I mean, what is the strategy? What is the change in it? So, if we're sitting here as a committee, what is that strategy? What are the changes in it? And how can I evaluate it without that information, which might be out there somewhere else and I may have just missed? And again, it looks like we're looking at spending considerable money in getting offices ready to rent out, and there's no correlation against the cost of that improvement against the potential revenue income. And how that capital is being funded against the revenue. So I've just got nothing really to go on those two questions. And I just think it might be a bigger piece of work that we have back, because I think the use of this campus is something which is of considerable interest to all members and could have a material impact on the future funding and that of this council going forward. And if we start entering into long-term leases with people, we are actually sort of giving ourselves no opportunity to change direction if we need to urgently, depending on the funding situation going forward. Thank you.
I'd just come back on that briefly. Certainly in terms of the capital programme, I think there have been some changes to the workplace strategy programme in terms of changing the order that some of the changes to this building happen, which has led to some quite minor slippage, I think. And as the report says, that's been agreed with the Chief Exec and Director of Corporate Resources in terms of which directorates move at which point, and then that has a knock-on effect. But there are also some savings targets, I think, in the current year and in future years in the MTFS for identifying further opportunities for leasing space in this building, and they are already built into the MTFS at the moment.
Just on the strategy piece, it's probably too grand a word, to be honest. It was more just where the sort of the grouping of the different services. So it's more about bringing kind of corporate resources kind of out of some of its existing things, so health can have a more sort of, I suppose, joined up part of the estate, as it were. So it's strategy. It's not changing. In truth, it's more just that sort of the configuration of the building to just get better use of the sort of the rental. So it's sort of blocking it together a bit more. So the rental income itself, and it's probably a fair request in terms of we can bring a sort of fuller update next time about how things are going, is on track. Sorry, it's Matt. So that is on track to meet it. The figures you've seen in the report are just the sort of the delays in terms of actual expenditure happening, but the rental itself is fine in terms of meeting that MTFS saving.
I suppose that's my question. My question is really, is the rental income significant against the strategy? Is the strategy correct, and how do we know the strategy is correct against the opportunity costs we might be able to get doing other things? And how and where is that decision being made and scrutinised? And also I asked the question about the vehicles and the fuel they're operating on.
Just to come back on the ways of working update, I believe there is an update for this commission programmed in April, so we can consider what further information we perhaps bring back to that committee or earlier. In terms of vehicles, my understanding is at this point we are procuring traditional fuel vehicles, so diesel vehicles, but there is a future programme in a future capital scheme to look at more energy efficient vehicles and electric vehicles, but that's not in the programme at the moment, as far as I'm aware.
Final question I made through that. So when we're procuring these vehicles, are we ensuring that the warranties don't preclude us from adapting them to different fuels or different methods? Because that would be, so, you know, for instance, I know other councils have had issues with hydrogenated vegetable oil where some of the manufacturers won't let them use it until their vehicles are out of warranty. So are we ensuring that the vehicles we buy have given us the ability to change and adapt those vehicles to meet circumstances which might provide either cleaner fuel at the back end or actually provide a savings, rather than just going for a commercial diesel, which if it comes from someone like Mercedes, they will never let you change a thing. And also on the first point, I just wondered, with the budget coming up, is April too late to have a look at ways of working where we might be able to have some input into Cabinet on how they set the budget, depending on whether we see any opportunities within that strategy, which we feel might not be providing the best income benefit for the council.
We'd have to check on the kind of the warranty type piece. We have used HVO in terms of, but it's more on sort of like I suppose a trial basis, you know, see how we go on. So it's not the entire fleet, and it will take a while because obviously sort of the bigger vehicles, it doesn't tend to be kind of you know, an electric alternative, etc. So we can come back on the HVO warranty type piece. I don't know, to be honest. In terms of the timing of the update, I mean, I suppose it's an ongoing program. So whether it comes in sort of, you know, I don't know, February or April shouldn't make too much difference in the overall scheme of things, because at the moment the strategy is that kind of, you know, the rental piece. So it shouldn't make much difference. There's not going to be a sort of a new decision as part of the MTFS in sort of February that's going to kind of, I suppose, knock it one way. It's just kind of the program's continuing doing what it's doing at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. I got a couple of things I wanted to ask about. So first of all, thanks for the report. Obviously, this is up to the end of September. Financial position. So what you're saying is that in the half year, we're already 10 million over budget. Is that right? Because that's what the report says. So you're shaking your head.
That's the projected position at year end. So based on what we're seeing in the first 6 months of the year,
okay.
We are projecting that if the current trends continue till the end of March, the position would be £10 million overspend.
So that's the end of year projection at the end of September. Okay. And is that you know, obviously, I'm sure you've had, is that still the case at the end of October, or are you not able to say at the moment?
At the moment, that is still the position that we're forecasting. Yes.
All right. So approximately 60% of the council's spend, according to the revenue budget monitoring, is in two areas, which is children and family service and adults and communities. Approximately 60% of the 523 million net it goes in that area. And one of the things I just want to focus on, since I've been a county councillor, those two areas have been consistently above budget. They've consistently been, and I know there's lots of reasons for that, but what we don't seem to from where I am, we don't seem to have got a grip in the last 2 years on those budget areas at all. They're still exceeding whatever budget we've set, and currently you're expecting them to exceed budget by a considerable amount, and we still haven't got a grip on control of those areas. Now, in paragraph 63, right at the end of the report, you say that they were considering spending controls. Could you explain a bit more about where you are and what the thinking is around spending controls? When are we talking about bringing that in? What sort of level of spending control are we talking about? And is that across all areas of council expenditure, or is that just in selected areas of council expenditure? I wonder if you could just explain that and tell me where we are with that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of spending controls, we are considering controls across all areas of council spend. So items like recruitment controls, so having all recruitment having to be approved at a certain level of the organisation, sort of very senior officers. Similarly for expenditure, having quite high level expenditure controls. And also for procurement, so where we have new tender opportunities starting, that they would need to be approved at quite a high level before they can progress. We're also considering having even stronger controls over what we would consider non-essential spend. I think that's still to be defined at the moment, and we're still working on that. But one option is to sort of put a moratorium on any spend in certain areas. We're just drafting some controls at the moment, and they will be considered by the council's corporate management team in the coming weeks. And there'll be a decision then around whether we want to bring those in, and if so, at what level.
Chair, I can just come back on that. So what sort of timescale are we talking about here? You said a few weeks. This is pretty desperate. You know, we are burning through the cash. We are over budget, consistently over what our allocated budget is. You know, MTFS says we've got 40 million gap projected for next year, 24-25, and eye-watering amounts of money that we have to find to save after that. And the director has written in a report that without external support, is very unlikely that he doesn't think that we'll be able to do that. So I'm just wondering at what point you're going to be bringing in these spending controls that you mentioned, because that sounds like, have you got a fixed timetable, or is it just when we get around to it? If you could explain that, thank you.
We are aiming to take them to corporate management team for consideration next week, and at that point there'll be a decision about what point we want to bring them in. But I do see it being fairly imminent. If they're approved at next week, it would be fairly imminent. What we have got though is some areas of control already in place. So as you've already mentioned, social care is one of the key areas of issue for us, both in terms of demand, but also in terms of cost and complexity of demand. So both adults and children's directorates already have a number of spending controls around social care, and that includes very close monitoring of sort of care packages, for instance, and reviewing the cost of them and the level of need that's in there. That's been underway for several weeks, if not slightly longer than that. So we are keeping a very close eye on the results of those panels to see whether it is having any impact on controlling cost and demand. And it is, I would say, particularly in children's, demand is actually sort of stabilising. So the number of looked after children we have is fairly static. The issue is the cost and complexity of dealing with those cases.
Okay, I just got one further point, if I may, Chair. So thank you for clarifying that is going to be an imminent. If that imminent decision is made to impose spending controls, moratorium across the whole of the council's expenditure, I presume, looking at Mr. Brecken, there will be a briefing for all members to explain what is being proposed and what that's going to mean in terms of if that decision was then made. Would that be the case?
I think members would be informed accordingly through the structure that we have in place. So, I mean, obviously there's groups and that would happen,
sure.
And certainly there's meetings that would also need to be held,
right.
Probably confidential member briefings, etc. But I'm sure there's no member in this room here that isn't aware of the situation that this council, like many other local authorities, face. And yeah, we are doing the very best we can with what we have. So
okay. That's great.
Okay, could I just add on the ways of working point earlier? I know Joe Morrison started putting, I mean, we had one in October with ways of working bulletins to all members, smaller items, I accept that, small ticket items as to how we're changing and how we're operating as a council. But there have been briefings before, and I think, as Declan said, it'd be probably timely. You know, we have a good relationship with the NHS through LPT and UHL with the space they take in this building. Ways of working have changed the way we operate as a council, but obviously what we have to do eventually is make sure that we still have enough space in this building for our own operations. So that's something that we're looking at as well. So I'm sure something to be brought back either to here or an all-member briefing would be useful. I would say that obviously a lot of what we're doing at the moment is commercially sensitive and confidential, so it may well be a private members briefing that comes through on. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, that wasn't my last point. Sorry, I did say I wanted to run more point. So just going to the Invest in Leicestershire fund, you talked about the return on that is on track, but that is only showing a 3.3% return. What I'm curious about, I suppose what's intriguing me is that county is invested in what you call indirect holdings, I think you're terming them, in a number of financial instruments, which I won't begin to understand what they are. But I'm just wondering, you know, is that a risky thing for us to do, to put, you know, 75 million into those investments, or is that a good thing for us to do because they actually produce less return, average 2.3 versus the directly held is actually less than half of the directly held property assets that we hold. We're actually getting on average less than half. I'm sure others will know a lot more about this than I do, but I'm just wondering, is that actually best value for money? Thank you, Chair. And that's the last of my points. Thank you.
In terms of direct holdings, just to be clear, there is actually an error in that table. So the overall return on indirect holdings should be 4%, not 2.3%. So apologies for that. And then I guess in terms of the general point, the rationale for those is to spread the council's risk and across a number of different assets. But Declan may want to add more on that one.
Sven's going to touch on it, because what we didn't want was just a sort of a pure property portfolio, because you just exposed to kind of, I suppose, one element of the overall kind of investment market, as it were. So we do, you can't make a return without sort of risk. It's sort of a bit of a statement of the obvious. So there is risk involved in them, but what we've tried to do is just target the sort of the lower risk end of the sort of the invest in spectrum, to just create that sort of diversification, so that if property does have a bad time, we've got sort of credit type investments, sort of loans, etc., that then aren't necessarily suffering at the same time. And that kind of proved to be kind of true last year when the sort of capital values of property dropped a lot. We do aim to de-risk it, so we only make investments, you know, the private debt you may recognise from your sort of your work on the pension fund is just a sort of a copy of what the pension fund does there. So we use the same kind of due diligence, make the same sort of decisions, as it were. So we're not just sort of going off on a tangent. So there is an element of risk, but the overall aim is to diversify the fund, and it gives us just that sort of exposure to different to asset classes, and always sort of backed up by sort of external due diligence.
Okay. So I've just come back on that. So thanks for clarifying the indirect holdings is 4%. But just on what you just said, take that, pensions, but that's a completely separate thing. That's not what this is about. Two things. First of all, County Cabinet recently decided not to invest into the Melton South Distributor Road because it said it hasn't got any money. But here we are, we've got money invested in private debt, old infrastructure, bank risk, whatever those things are. £75.5 million worth of taxpayers' money, basically, invested in these things. And yet in infrastructure projects, we weren't able to find the money to invest because we said, oh, it's too risky. And so we've actually handed money back to the government that the government was going to give us, or taxpayers' money. It's all taxpayers' money, we remember. So I'm just kind of wondering where the money then has come from to invest in this actual investment fund. Is this come from revenue, or is this just money we've got hanging around waiting to find another home, or you're waiting to go off to be spent on other things, and we're just kind of investing it in this? as kind of a holding exercise in sort of treasury management, or is this, it's money we've sort of taken out of our revenue account over the years and invested into this because it gives us a return, albeit not spectacularly high, but it just gives us a steady return, which is then, I accept, is invested back into services. So I'm just wondering what the source of the actual funding of some of these cash investments actually is. Thank you.
Most of the indirects are treasury management, so they are just that kind of, I suppose, management of the working capital of the council. And I suppose it's important to sort of differentiate between investment in infrastructure, which obviously builds a road for the county but doesn't produce any sort of financial return, whereas these investments do produce a financial return. So if you were to sell these to spend on something like Melton South, it would create a hole in the budget of about £3 million a year. So it is an important contribution, but the bulk of these holdings, apart from the infrastructure fund, I think, are just treasury management.
I don't have any specific points. It's more the general feel of the whole report. The councils have picked up quite a lot of the specifics. Are we at what point do we get to our tipping point? I mean, I think, I've been a county councillor for 6 years, and every conversation is, we've got enough money, we need to cut, we need to cut, we need to cut, we need to cut. And actually, it feels as if now we're seeing that cuts in previous years are generating service need, i.e., cuts in Sure Start, for example, has meant that little ones haven't been supported as well as they once were from zero. And are we seeing that in terms of management of SEND now going forward? Because we work with early work prevention, has that now come home to roost, so to speak? So at what point is our tipping point? Authorities across the country and now, and in real dire situations. This is not just Leicestershire, and we've starved some of this off because we've been well financially managed, but that has come at a massive cost, and I don't think we can underestimate that cost if we are looking at older people maybe not getting the packages they once were. And I think that that's acknowledged. We've reduced packages over time. We're obviously now not providing the service that we want to families with special educational needs children because they're being delayed in the process because we don't have the capacity. So what is our tipping point? Because it feels like we've been close to the edge for some time. And do we get a breathing? Do you guys get any breathing space at any point in the future? Because it's been pretty dire the whole time I've been a county councillor. It's got no better. What's the answer? More cash? Where are we? Where do we go? We've had conversation after conversation with government, and it hasn't given us any extra money. What do we really need to run the authority? And at what point do we say, nah, enough's enough? We need to change tack here, because it feels it's pretty desperate. Leicester City have just announced that they're in, they're obviously going to have troubles. Birmingham, we know, have gone to the wall, which is a completely different scenario. Northamptonshire was the first one to go in terms of their position now. I mean, it's unitary. We've got all authority after authority after authority now in dire straits. What's the answer?
Yes. Just a couple of points, perhaps before Declan and Mr. Brecker may want to come in as well. But in terms of the tipping point, I think certainly for the current financial year, we do still retain sort of some risk contingencies, and they are available. What we're trying to do is manage the overspends that we've got before having to look at that. Hence why we're also looking at spending controls. But we are very closely managing the current year budget and do have some options. I think the key then in terms of looking forward is to make sure we are planning for that as early as possible, and to make sure we understand what the position is and what's driving it, so that we've got time to plan for it. I think in terms of social care, the difficulty is it is a demand-led service, and what we're having to look at is really how we can try and reduce or close off some of that demand. But actually what we're seeing more of now is, as I think I've mentioned in children's, actually demand is starting to stabilise. It's some of the other issues around the costs of providing the service, and particularly some of the private sector issues that we've got. So actually we can do what we can to manage demand, but we are still seeing issues in costs and complexity, and that is a national issue. And I think Leicestershire comparatively is doing pretty well compared to others, but I think it is something that government is going to need to tackle in terms of that social care issue and the private sector sort of skewing some of the costs that the authority is incurring. But it's not just an issue for Leicestershire, but certainly, we do have a challenge, and we do have a growing challenge. But I think the key is planning for that very early, which is what we're trying to do now. And we are looking ahead at the autumn statement as well, which is a couple of weeks away. We're not anticipating any extra funding, but we certainly are lobbying very hard, certainly on the social care elements.
Just a couple of points. One is, it does feel a little bit surreal, but we are giving more people services and support than we ever have done before, and it's just a sheer volume of demand that kind of comes through. And if you take SEND, and the sort of millions and millions of pounds of extra money the government have put in, plus we've had to put money in locally as well, and it's just swamped by the extra demand. So hence then it's sort of the appearance of a sort of a service that's kind of struggling with cuts, when actually it's not. It's a service that's just not physically possible to push enough money into it. A, we don't have the money, and B, the struggle to find sort of the stuff anyway. So we are in a sort of slightly surreal situation. But as Simone set out, we do feel we're not at the next wave, as it were, of people are going to get themselves into sort of dire straits initially. We'll see ourselves through this sort of spending review period, and then it's very hard for anyone to say exactly where they're going to land after that. But the important thing is that we keep, sort of the directors of children's, adults, environment, transport, do keep an eye on those kind of demand areas and try and sort of just kind of keep working out, well, how can you sort of create interventions in a different way? How can we fulfil the duties that we've got in a different way, which is the kind of the world local government's in across the board at the moment. But it is difficult. And if you read any of the local government press, you realise that everybody is in this position apart from a very small minority.
I'll just come back on 2 points, because I think there has been a massive uplift, particularly around residential care for children, but we've allowed the private sector to grow into that space, and certainly whilst Councillor King raised an alternative use of the investment money, maybe there is a real element of, do we look at investor save programs such as bringing some of that back in house? Is it, there is I think it's 5,500 average per week place, and that's the national average, not localized average. Is the real case to actually go in, the private sector has tipped over financially, we can manage this better ourselves? Is what kind of conversations are had over that? We know that the independent sector has got 380 odd children in special educational needs, and that is extraordinarily more expensive than providing our own. And I know we're building our own, and I understand that. But at what point do we go, well, the investment in revenue is this much per year, and if we did it ourselves, it was this much a year. It's worth borrowing to make that investment pay. Where are we at with some of those discussions? Because I think Councillor King makes a really good point in terms of alternative use of that treasury management money, and actually it's not bringing us a huge amount of cash investment. Could we actually save more in our revenue costs by investing that money in a different way?
We do have a social care investment programme in the capital programme, which is exactly that, around increasing our own internal provision for both adults and children's social care, and doing that in partnership as well with the voluntary sector. So we're looking at both, or we are both, I think, building our own and buying some sort of on the open market. I think there are some challenges with that in itself, in terms of how the housing market is at the moment, but also part of the challenge, I think, even when we have our own internal provision, is then staffing that, and we are seeing recruitment and retention issues, internally with different types of staff actually. So whilst that absolutely is one of our priorities, and it is part of the capital programme, and we do have MTFS savings targets linked to increasing our own provision, but there are also risks around that in terms of being able to staff it, and some of the sort of welfare risks that come with having our own provision as well.
Could I just add, Phil said earlier, it's 75% of our budget is adult and social care and children's social care. And we certainly know the problems. I mean, the committees for adults and children's both have had recent reports. And I know Terry chairs the one, I know Hilary chairs the other. And I think you're more than aware of what we're trying to do. I think we do deliver. It is demand driven. We do have to, when someone comes into the system, provide that care, which is why you've got the overspends on those two lines. But I think what we need to look at, which is what we are concentrating on with sort of savings that we continually make in this sort of authority to balance the book, is making sure that we still deliver the service, but it's doing it differently. And that's something that we will be focusing on over the next sort of probably 3 to 6 months, and we have to get that right. And I agree, the savings to invest schemes we do have, there is sometimes an issue in trying to get find a property. When you find a property that's already built, you then have to sort of modify it and spend hundreds of thousands of pounds just getting what is basically a 4-bedroom bungalow fit for purpose. And it's that option, but we are trying our very best, and it's we will continue to try. But I think Simone and Declan have said that we have a position for next year 24-25 when we think it's doable. After that it gets tight, but I'm sure we'll have a new government coming in place next year at some point, and that government then has to make decisions. But we're not expecting a great deal of monies to come through in this statement on the 22nd November, but we have to wait and see. So thank you.
Mr. Galton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's all quite depressing, really. It is, no doubt, the situation's getting worse. You can see it. I think what's really worrying is some of the percentages that's in the table. For example, on page 52, on the company Asylum Seeking Children, 107% increase in cost, SEN service budget 48%, and so on and so forth. I mean, how do you deal with that if a budget goes up? The demand on that budget, or the costs, as has been explained, increases by that. No amount of cuts elsewhere. This is the problem that really, and that's to Councillor King, we've made huge savings across the council, only to find that the costs have then gone up in other services and more than wiped out those savings. So it's an endless circle. There are some really worrying individual budgets. You know, we've spoken every meeting, don't we, about the high needs block and what we're storing up there. I know we're in this programme with the government try and address that, as indeed a number of other councils are. But that the debt that's being built up there, no explanation how that's going to be resolved at the end of it, and it just keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. Mention's been made of the average residential care, external residential care, £5,750 a week. I have to believe that there is another better way of doing that, as Mrs. Hack suggested. Notwithstanding all the problems, it's perhaps, with hindsight, you know, did we do the right thing taking out all that in-house provision some years ago when we actually owned these properties? Yeah, but the one common issue that comes forward from every department again and again is, well, we didn't manage to do this because of lack of staff, recruitment problems, and therefore we've had to use agency, and the cost of agency is more. It's absolutely common in many of the individual service budget comments. And I think we've raised this before, and I think, Chairman, at a corporate level, I'm sure work's being done. But I think we need to look at this because, you know, it's going to cost us a lot more money going forward to keep having to use agency staff to fill and get some of this work done. Mention is made of locums having to be used in legal services and so on. Leicestershire is an attractive place to work in the public sector. We ought not to be in a worse position than other authorities. We ought to be able to do that. And I'm just wondering if we actually need some sort of corporate campaign, if you like, to market Leicestershire as a good place to come and work. You know, we'll be looking at that at the right corporate level. So I think it would be interesting to understand more what officers are doing to try and address that going forward, because that would be one thing we could do to try and help the situation. It's disappointing to note that some
individual comments. So, for example, transport SEN transport delays because applications for transport were not received from Children and Family Services. I suspect this is an example of lack of staffing, just not being able to cope with the level of work being done. But that is the other one that really worries me, the transport. 15 million for SEN transport and clearly still rising. I just don't understand how we're going to be able to address that. It's now the biggest area spend in the Environment and Transport Department. We're spending more on that than we are on maintaining the network in revenue. Again, that is really, really worrying. Final comment, just wanted to clarify, if the situation does continue to deteriorate, we've got threats of 114 being talked about in many other authorities that we wouldn't dreamt have had to go down that road. Now, I know consistently we've said we're not in that position. We don't intend to get there. In fact, I don't want to paraphrase the leader at the last council meeting, but it was something about something freezing over before it would happen, before this council would. But I just want to understand that process, that it's not, I think, Chairman 3, it's not the leader's decision to go down that route, is it? I just want clarity. Legally, it sits with the with Declan as the one. It wouldn't be a political decision whether or not to do that and issue a 114 notice. It would actually be the statutory officers. I'd just like to get that on the record as clarity. And I'd just like to understand what happens before that. So are there any kind of warnings before that are legally required to be given? Or is it just bang, sorry, we've got to issue that 114? Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to start off on the section 114 one? Otherwise I'll forget it. It's a pretty crude piece of legislation, so there isn't a kind of a build up to it. It's just it's a judgment. It's either kind of awareness that a sort of illegal spend has been made. So it could be that you've just done something outside of the council's powers, or, and it is specifically mentioned in the legislation, that it's view that it's unlikely to be able to balance the budget, and that is the view of the Section 151 officer. But it doesn't come with any mechanisms in advance of that. The only requirement is that the Section 151 officer consults with the other two statutory officers, being the sort of the head of paid service, the chief exec, and the monitoring officer, being Lauren, the sort of the head of legal. And all that happens when you raise the kind of the Section 114 notice is it just puts the kind of I suppose it just sort of crystallises the problem, as it were, for the administration. It gives them 21 days to kind of come back with proposals where, either the illegal spend has been resolved or the budget can be balanced. And during that time, the level of expenditure that can be made on anything that's not either statutorily or will make the situation work is just severely restricted. But it is a very crude tool, so that's effectively all it does. In the reality of the authorities that have raised Section 114 notices, that's then a trigger for government to send in the commissioners. And this is the leader's assessment. The assessment is correct. It's kind of all, what does a Section 114 notice give you? Well, it doesn't actually do anything for you. All that happens is the commissioners come in, and then the authority has to pay for those commissioners, and they're not cheap. The commissioners tend to then employ a load of consultants because they're only part-time workers, and guess what? The authority's got to pay for them and consultants as well. And then all that happens is the commissioners say, well, members, are you going to make the decision? If you can't make the decisions, we'll make them for you. So effectively, all you're doing is paying a hell of a lot of money for somebody else to make decisions that you kind of should have made yourself. So you're absolutely right. Sort of technically, it does come down to the Section 151 officer as myself. If my view is that we can't balance the budget, you should raise a Section 114 notice. Where it's helpful is the leader's position that actually you shouldn't just do a Northamptonshire and say, oh well, somebody will help us out. We'll just wait. You should still actively try and keep those decisions and controls in your own hands. If you look at some of the other authorities where a Section 114 has been necessary, it's just because the relationship between officers and members is just fundamentally broken down, and you need almost somebody in the room to kind of help resolve that position. But it doesn't give you any money. It just gives you another way of solving the problem you should have solved yourself. So.
And just then on this issue of recruitment and vacancy levels and having to use agency staff, I know you spoke before doing that, but would there be some benefit in us having a look at that, perhaps in the spring in more detail?
it's on the corporate risk register. I'm just wondering what's the best placement of it, whether it's here or a presentation to sort of corporate governance committee. So if you leave it with us to sort of come back, but we can do it to one, because you're right, it's a persistent issue, and there is work that kind of goes on to try and improve it, but we've not cracked the nut, and I suppose it's an economy-wide issue as well. But now you're right, it's having a big financial impact. But we'll have a look as officers whether it's here or whether it's corporate governance committee is the right place for it.
Mrs. Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there's been a lot of discussion. We all know the problems. There's just one or two points I'd like to raise, mainly as the chair of Children and Families Scrutiny. And we had our meeting yesterday, and I would like to draw the committee's attention to page 36 of your agenda. And some councillors have already pointed this out, that the overspend on the placement budget has gone up by 20%, and that some costs are 5,750 per child per week. These are for very high, for children who have very high dependency needs. They need a lot of care. They need 24-hour care. So you're talking about high maintenance, and that is a problem. Talk has been made about bringing some of these things back in-house. That initially costs a lot of money, because you can't just pick up a child and say, well, you're not living there, you're now going to live here, but by the way, you won't have the same rooms or staff because of that. The other thing is that outside staff, we would still then be in competition with private suppliers regarding the salaries and wages they can command. This is a rising problem. The population of Leicestershire, I've lived here now for more than 20 years, has vastly increased. Younger people are moving in, thank goodness, and everything, we're pleased, but the rate of demand has risen as well. The other thing is that mention has been made about agency staff and what we're doing about recruitment. Well, I know the officers present here today know that in the department I'm particularly interested in, they've thought of everything to kind of reduce. We've taken on sort of interns and apprentices. Some of them are now staying with it. We've given time to work. We've got people, we're pushing that the advantages of working, besides, which was raised earlier, besides taking home more money, is the quality of life, quality of work. But this is an overall problem, and we have to look after these children, and we are making it more, that's getting a bit more steady. It's not rising so much, and that's the support we're giving to our families in doing that. The family hubs are now coming into place, which are very good. But all this takes time, and we are looking at it. I've been involved, like Mrs. Hack, for 6 years here, and I've been on this committee one way or another for those 6 years. And I think you may be confident that all the staff in these departments are doing their very, very best to try and reduce the cost. But if you've got children that need 24-hour care with 2 carers, you can't say, oh, well, we'll take 1 carer away because it won't cost so much. We've just got to do it. And people, quite rightly, we don't want to go back. Well, I certainly don't want to go back to the old-fashioned children's homes that were around when I had my children. We want these children demand, and we've all signed up to this, that we will not treat our children any differently that are in care than they deserve and they would get. And this costs money, but we are fighting it and we're looking at other ways. We should we mustn't criticise the officers too much. They're doing the very best in very, very difficult circumstances. I'd like I suppose I should say a question, but just to ask the officers if I'm on the right track. Thank you very much.
Just to confirm that those measures that have just been outlined are definitely in place, and we're exploring whatever we can to try and reduce the demand and to tackle some of the issues that we're seeing in the social care market as well. But some of those things will take time, and of course we are certainly in terms of recruitment and retention, we are in competition with lots of other local authorities there as well.
Mr. Richardson, did you?
Thank you, Chair. So I've been listening intently, so I've come back with some questions and some observations. First of all, I don't think it's all doom, gloom and despondency. I mean, certainly in adults communities on Monday, the service we're providing and the cost we're providing it at for the people and the outcomes we're getting, if that was replicated across the country, there would actually be plenty of money in local government to spread around under a fair funding formula, because other councils are spending 2 or 3 times as much as we are and getting worse outcomes. And again, on the staff retention side, it was pleasing to note on Monday that we are doing wonders on staff retention in adults communities. It's getting better by the day, and that's helping us reduce backlog. So I think there are some positives. I welcome what Lee has said about perhaps having a further discussion on ways of working, because my concern is we're fast becoming an NHS campus. Yeah. And we should be looking at this from the point of view of what do we need as a county council, and therefore what do we then do with the rest of the campus, rather than just let the NHS take it over by stealth, which is my big concern. And we do have the mechanism, I keep on saying this, I don't know why we never do it, of either exempt reports or, as we did the other day, which was extremely useful, was a confidential working party, which I think added value to it, and hopefully those sort of things can actually accelerate changes going forward. I do worry about the use of percentages, and I was going to make that point. Sorry, averages, because Hilary mentioned this. So we've been banding around the average in paragraph 17, but the simple fact is we've got 2 or 3 children that are costing us several £100,000 a year. So the true average for the greater majority, and what we probably should do is look to put that down into different bands of children who cost X amount, children who cost X amount, because I think that gives a far better relationship and would actually demonstrate to the public the challenges faced by councils with some very high need people through no fault of their own. Don't get me wrong, they need the care, and there is a cost to that care, and it has to be specialist care, which we're unlikely to be able to provide. I disagree slightly with Declan in that if you spend money on infrastructure, we get no return. Well, of course we do, because you get more businesses, you get more houses. So we get a far better revenue income because houses built quicker, business rates come in faster. So, and in fact, the very first report we had today on place marketing suggested in the report that there is a massive benefit to us of inward investment, which comes if you have infrastructure. But I suppose what I would say about infrastructure, it does actually show me we've long had this debate about whether or not we should be in a regional combined authority, and the point was always made that there was likely to be no benefit to Leicestershire. Well, that bubble was burst when 1.4 billion was awarded to Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire over 10 years, and we've been left out of it because the intransigence of one leader to actually let Leicester and Leicestershire join in. So there would be plenty of money for infrastructure if Sir Peter Salisbury decided to do away with the mayoralty tomorrow, and I think we can't ignore that fact because it's a proven fact now with income coming in. My questions in some ways are, with the rules that cover accumulated high needs deficit, which is off balance sheet, when the government instructed us that we could do that, was there any provision within those rules about at what point you get to when the revenue cost of that accumulated debt has to be meant, or they have to provide anything, or is it just open-ended, off-balance sheet forever? Because I share the view that Simon does, that, I mean, it's great for the government to say it's off-balance sheet, but you still have to fund the debt. It's still funding we've got. And I suppose just on a minor point, it was mentioned by Simone as we always bandy these things around. It will be decided by the corporate management team. Who the hell are the corporate management team, and therefore who scrutinises the corporate management team in what event under which place? So every time I come to, I would think I'd know after this length of time as a county councillor, but I find more and more committees or little groups that I have no knowledge of who seem to make decisions, and I'm not sure where scrutiny of those groups who make those decisions takes place. Because presumably it should be here. So one would have thought if there was a decision made by the corporate management team that we need to invoke emergency saving measures or spending, because it should come back to this committee, PDQ, perhaps in an urgent format rather than us waiting 6 months or a year before we actually discuss it and look at it in detail. So hopefully there's some questions in there as well as some comments. But I said the main ones are about the accumulated high need deficit, who are the corporate management team, and who actually scrutinises them.
So, Send, you're kind of right. The high needs deficit, government kind of say you can move it off balance sheet, but guess what? We have to fund the cash flow. So, and the question has been asked of DFE about are they going to fund the cash flow, and the answer is no. So that is. I don't know, that goes straight in against your books, that you sort of that income foregone. So it's not great by any stretch of the imagination. Corporate management team is just it's the sort of the senior officer group, so chaired by John Sinnott, and it's just a collection of chief officers. So it's not a decision-making body as such in terms of the sort of, I suppose, the authority's kind of normal kind of sort of language and mechanisms. It's more that sort of senior officer group that just kind of, I suppose, put forward and agrees what's the approach that we're going to sort of recommend to sort of members if that's what's needed. And the spend controls is primarily kind of tightening up of sort of operational measures. So instead of, I don't know, more junior people approvals get removed from them, so it becomes a more sort of senior basis. You know, maybe there's sort of cross review of sort of approaches to sort of recruitment across departmental, so we're making sure we're prioritising the right resource. So it's not making a decision about kind of impacting the sort of services delivered. It's more about that kind of sort of tightening up. And if it did stray into that kind of more fundamental kind of restricting back service levels, you're absolutely right. It's a cabinet decision. It should come here first. So hopefully that gives a bit of comfort. It is more around the operational mechanics of the sort of how we've sort of run the council, as opposed to trying to take decisions away from sort of the member forum, which it's sort of right we should sit in.
Do any other members have any comments, questions on this item? No. Okay. Well, you know, as we see from the report, you know, the financial pressures are still extreme on the authority, and obviously every authority in the country, sadly, almost with a few exceptions, is in the same situation, although we have our own specific problems with the lack of fair funding, which doesn't help. And obviously, although we've moved away from a lot of the discretionary services that we provide, because the statutory services costs are just going up and up, it leaves us in this situation. I mean, you look at the chart in paragraph 26, which shows that the number of service users in adult services going up significantly more than we'd expect. And then in paragraph 27, I think the average cost per service user has gone up over 20% in 2 years. And obviously there's inflation makes its impact, but even so, that doesn't account for everything. So clearly, you know, we're in a challenging situation. We have to hope something turns up to get us out of it. But at the moment, it doesn't seem terribly hopeful. But there we go. Thank you again, Declan and Simone and Mr. Brecken, for coming today. And we will move on to the final item today, which is item 12, the annual delivery report and performance compendium 2023. Andy Brown, the business intelligence team leader, is introducing the item and is supported by Zafar Salim, head of communities policy and resilience, and Richard Wilding from the business intelligence team leader. I think, Andy, are you leading on this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a few words of introduction from myself, and then 3 quick slides from Richard on the data side, just to update the committee on the performance position. So the report before you today is the draft annual delivery report and performance compendium for 2023, due to go to the Cabinet 24th November and then on to Council. So very much welcome your views on the contents. We've very much followed the style of the report we did last year. We seem to have some positive feedback from members last year when we've done a much shorter, sort of sharper bullet point style report, particularly on the delivery side, and then really narrowed down the compendium to the sort of key data around council's funding, core spending power, risks and performance data. So a similar report this time round. The first section on the narrative focuses very much around the council's strategic plan and key interventions to deliver the outcomes in the plan. And we've worked very closely with Sapphire's team, the policy team that leads the work on the strategic plan, and various outcome boards that bring people around the council together to focus on delivery of the outcomes. So we've set out the key achievements in the delivery report. I think there's some real positive achievement in those delivery section, some really good work across the council, all services really trying to contribute to deliver those outcomes. So some really big policy interventions around environment, economy, communities, etc. But also other smaller services, important services such as trading standards, adult learning, library, community services contributing to delivery of the outcomes. So I think some sort of real positivity in there to counter some of this, obviously the challenging budget scenario. In terms of the data side, Richard, do you just want to run through the 3 quick slides just to update the committee on the data position?
Thanks, Andy. Thank you, Chair. So I've got in here the first slide, which is in the report, just by way of context, really. This shows spend across the bottom horizontal axis and performance on the vertical axis. And it, similar to previous years, it emphasises the fact that the council it's in that top right quadrant, so being low spending compared to other counties and being high performing as well. So last year's aggregated performance results placed us 5th compared to other counties, and that was down from 3rd the previous year. North Yorkshire had taken an increase and Buckinghamshire moved slightly above us compared to the previous year. So in terms of the dashboards that are in the report from page 162 onwards in the pack, this just summarises the quartile positions, so where we sit relative to other comparator authorities. It shows the spread of indicators over the last 4 years, with the most recent years in darkest purple. So first quartile here, just to recap, it's performance in the top 25% of comparator authorities. Some of these are based on published end of year data from 22-23, which is the year that's recently ended. Some are still based on previous end of year results when we're still waiting for those results to be published by government. And I think the results that you see here, they really just suggest, I think, natural variation from year to year. We've got a slightly lower percentage in the top quartile compared to last year, and then a slightly higher percentage in the second quartile. So variation you see from year to year, really. This slide summarises direction of travel of the indicators in those dashboards. So really whether there's been an improvement or a decline in performance compared to the previous result. So this also shows the position for the last 4 years, again with darkest blue representing the most recent years. It's worth noting, I think, that many of the indicators do cover outcomes. So some of them are largely within our control, so that might be things like reablement of people who are coming out of hospital, whereas others are largely outside our control, so things like unemployment or life expectancy. So really just to sort of pick out what we're seeing on this chart, we have seen a larger proportion of indicators deteriorating both this year and last year in terms of year-on-year performance position. Quite a complicated position to summarise. Some of it is bounce back from areas that were perhaps positively affected by the pandemic. So some areas such as road casualties or CO2 emissions, they went down during the pandemic, they're now coming back up. So it's a bit of that we're seeing in these results. So that's it really in terms of summarising the data. We have got a couple of slides which show really some areas of continued sort of focus in performance terms. I don't know if Andy, you want to say anything more about that or
No, just as Richard mentioned, it is quite tricky to unpack some of the data because of the impacts of COVID, particularly in the long tail to COVID, particularly into the sort of health world, but also the kind of the economic situation, the cost of living crisis and the way that's impacted. So clearly there's been some considerable impact around some of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. and also that impact from COVID, some of the benefits from COVID, particularly around the environment during lockdowns. We've obviously seen that now switch to sort of more traffic, accidents, etc. So it does take a little bit of unpacking around the data. Within that, there are some real positives. There has been some improvements in areas that we're lower quartile over the last 2 or 3 years through the focused work services they've done through their business planning, service planning. So we have seen some good improvements in certain areas, but equally some areas are more challenged by the economic environment. So we've tried to set out in the report just a bit of a summary about what's improved, what the issues are, and I'm hoping that's helpful to yourselves in terms of what might be coming through the system in terms of reports, areas to monitor and extra areas you might want to ask for information on.
Thank you. Let's comment on Mr. Richardson.
Sorry, thank you. I'll start on paragraph 16 if I can find it. I've lost it now. We say economy worse for economic perceptions. On whose perception? I mean, the growth figures have been restated in the last few months, as we know. So we've had far better economic growth than most of our major competitors, particularly including Germany and France. So whose perception is it? And it rather clashes with page 88, Appendix A, when we say we've got a strong economy. So we've got one part of the report saying the perception of somebody, it doesn't say who, is that our economy is struggling. We also talk about housing, saying that we've delivered a significant number of housing, particularly for affordable housing. Well, it's clearly not true. I mean, even the division which I'm in, which obviously forms part of Blaby District, the affordable housing requirement in Blaby District alone is 578 units a year. I mean, Blaby are only building in total 380 units a year. So how are we doing wonderfully well on affordable housing? And it doesn't chime with what all of our second-tier authorities are spending on homelessness. So that seems somewhat strange. I then went down to transport as well on page 88. Rather sort of goes against the other one. So it says we're spending money on the 11 junctions or 8 junctions on the 511 to stimulate growth, new housing, etc., because it brings in income. And one just wonders why it's always the 511. I mean, the biggest pinch point in the whole of Leicestershire is junction 21 of the motorway, which I know that we as the county put in a joint bid with Blaby District on LUF 2 funding last year. But it strikes me that any changes to that junction would actually, working with Highways England, would actually unlock far better outcomes, particularly in stimulating housing, income, etc. So I'm just wondering where these comments in the report come from and by who, because and how do we substantiate them?
Chair, I can pick up a few of those. In terms of the query about the economy, I think the broad brush of the economic indicators, so the big picture shows that broadly the Leicestershire economy is in, the fundamentals are not bad. We're doing reasonably well compared to other county areas. The bit about the perceptions, the council runs a community survey with a sample that rolls throughout the year. So there's around about 100 people every month that are questioned by telephone. And we look at the results of those to look at sort of, I guess, not quite real time, but so we can gauge people's perceptions. And that's where the data on people's optimism about the future of the economy and jobs comes from. So I think there's an apparent contradiction, I guess, in the fundamentals of the economy doing perhaps okay, but people not being particularly optimistic about the future in terms of jobs and the economy over the next 12 months. So that hopefully helps to answer a bit around the economy. On affordable housing, undoubtedly there's a huge need for affordable housing. I think the data that we've got in the report is previous years' delivery of affordable housing, and compared to other areas, I think we compare number of units delivered per head of population. We're actually doing quite well compared to other counties. I think we're one of the very best in terms of delivering numbers of housing. I mean, plainly, we're not the housing authority, so we have to work with the districts to help sort of support delivery of those numbers. And there is a lot more to do in that area, undoubtedly.
Okay, Mr. Morgan.
Sorry, it was on the position of polling that you just raised, which is one of my book interests. I was going to say bugbears interest. So is this carried out by a third party organisation?
It is. The survey field work is done by an external survey company. It's a randomly selected sample.
Okay, that's disastrous in that case. If it's randomly selected, it's literally worthless information. So in polling terms, so if you go on to the national body covers polling companies that they have to sign up to, they have to comply with very strict criteria for polling to actually be of any worth. There are statistically there are quantities of polling that needs to be carried out based on a sort of representative sample on demographics, etc., before you can actually statistically get to a point where you can actually use that polling evidence to be able to actually justify a position, etc., etc. If it's literally a randomly selected 100 phone calls per month, to be frank, it's not worth using as data. It has no statistical benefit at all. So I would be really careful about us spending money on that type of survey, B, actually using it in any way at all in any report, because in statistical purposes it is literally has no benefit.
If I could just clarify on that one, I mean, the sample is around 100 a month. It sums up to 1,600 interviews per year. They are randomly selected, but we have quotas where they need to get a balance in terms of geography, so by district, by gender, by age, by ethnicity. What we report on and what's in the report is a rolling 12 months figure. So it's based on those 1,600 responses. We certainly wouldn't make decisions or do anything based on the 100 per month. I was just trying to break that down to demonstrate that it's the size of the sample. So we'll compare the results for last 12 months with the 12 months before that to look at whether we've got change. We look at what the sort of confidence intervals are there and the margin of error, and we'd only report on there being a difference between those 2 points if there was a statistically significant difference based on the sample size, etc.
Yeah, but in polling terms, statistical terms, if it's a phone call base of 100 people that potentially change on a monthly basis because it's not the same 100 people, you can only reference 100 people. Most polling organisations will poll just over 1,000 people to actually get a representative sample. 100 is statistically could be out by plus or minus 10, 15, 20%. I mean, it's and so any variation based on that type of sample size, to be frank, will bounce around all over the place. If it's not bouncing around all over the place, then I'd really question where the information is genuinely coming from. Telephone polling these days is considered to be exceptionally difficult to justify because most people don't have home telephones. And therefore obtaining numbers is incredibly difficult. I mean, I'm more than happy to put you in contact with people who are working for national pollsters, but I really question if we are inserting that data into reports, the value of that data, to be honest.
I would just emphasise that it is the 1,600 annual sample that we tend to report on. We would never take decisions based on sort of the sample size of 100. So I accept most of what you're saying, but at the same time, we've got a duty to sort of engage the community, engage their views, and this is just one way of doing that.
Yeah, just to add, it is a complex area to unpick at the moment. I think the economic position, because I think you've got a mix of the population. So some people that have really found the economic impact of the cost of living crisis really sort of hit their particular family, etc. And some areas that have maybe sort of working from home, maybe had to pay uplifts, etc. So I think you've got a real complex set of information around housing, around economic perceptions. So we do triangulate a lot of that against ONS data that's coming out nationally, just to look at those particular sort of trends and issues in the population. So the economic perceptions that we capture locally through the survey is part of that, but that figure doesn't play a significant role in some of the operational decisions that are taken that you've heard about today. So it is just a contributing piece of intelligence that we're using to help steer some of the decisions that we've got.
Anyone? Yes.
Just a little delve into the numbers on page 79. It indicates the areas that are performing not as well this year as we did last year. There seems to be one missing on the public health. I don't know what percentage of physically, is that just less, or is there anything that sits behind that? But I suppose the interesting thing is what impact does that have, and how quickly do we change our policy approach based on some of this data?
Yes, thanks for that. I think it would benefit an extra bit of comment on that line around physically active adults. There's a report that's going through the system at the moment from Mike Sands, from the Director of Public Health's annual report, which has a lot of detail around all of the health outcome metrics. And in particular, he's pulled out a few that are a real issue that he wants to get behind and look at some actions around. Physical activity and diet are two of the ones that he's pulled out in relation to particular outcomes that he's looking to focus some work around and get behind moving forwards. So we'll have an extra line around that. The actual figure we can put in as well. I think that comes later in the dashboard, so we can put the figure in. So it's basically say that is an area of focus, and it is an area to improve, and Mike's thinking about the work that's going to happen around that.
If I just come back on that, we're obviously at the moment consulting on the design guide for new developments. And one of the things that I'm really, it's becoming really obvious to me, I'm wandering around door knocking, doing lots of work on that at the moment. It's quite clear how people cycling and walking are being engineered out of new developments. So actually, how do we put that back in from a public health would be really useful. One of the other things that I thought was interesting on the that bit of the report on children and families is the average A-level point score was below average in 2022. I don't think that's hugely unusual, because of most of those youngsters will have had severe interruptions in their education because of COVID. We have youngsters here that will have been affected during their final year of their GCSEs and year one of their A-level. So I think the fact that they've did as well as they did, I think is actually a plus, and we should have expected a reduction. These youngsters have been through an awful lot. I think it's a real shame that appears on the report with that terminology, and I'm sure there's more data in the wider report. But I think for us, in terms of looking at it, I don't think that was an unusual position for the youngsters to have suffered in that year in particular.
Yes, I think in terms of the school improvement agenda generally, actually, when we put this report together, we didn't have the school data available to us, and that's a really important area that we always look at, particularly the comparative position of Leicestershire schools, both in terms of A-levels and the wider range of GCSEs, etc. available. We have got that data now, so I don't know whether Richard's had a chance to crunch through it, but over the last 2 or 3 years, with the changes in the school system, we have seen some improvement in the key stage 4 measures and in the progress measures, which has been positive, which we think some of those system changes, particularly the age range shift from sort of 11 to 14, 14, 16 break to go all through, has helped that position. So we have seen some improvement in that area. But at A-level scores, I think we've been below perhaps what we hoped we want to be, what the aspirations are, and been encouraging the school improvement partnership, particularly to look and try and get behind this, whether it's the number of pupils choosing 4 A-levels rather than 3, whether it's the choice of A-levels, whether it's the kind of quality of teaching around some of the less core subjects. So we are really flagging that as an area that perhaps the committee or the relevant bodies might want to be looking at, just to try and get behind that, to see what the improvement strategy is, because clearly we want A-levels scores in Leicestershire to be very, very high, comparable with the best. This is saying we think we're below average, and it's very close to the average, I think.
Mr. King.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks. So just picking up what actually Mr. Morgan was saying about surveys, if we are doing, as you say, a community survey, I think that'd be very interesting, and we should actually, as members, be able to see the outcome of and the data and the demographics behind that survey, because as Mr. Morgan articulated, a lot of particularly younger residents, younger adults, don't actually have, many residents don't have landlines anymore. So getting getting phone numbers to contact residents, I'm just wondering how that's been achieved and how you're ensuring, and we don't want to go into that detail now, but it's quite important because obviously the demographic will be skewed if that's not been handled very, very carefully. Was a couple of points I wanted to make. So first of all, in one of the sections, it talks about hospital discharge grants, and I know we're doing that, but I'm just wondering, it might be helpful in the report if you could actually put a number on that, how many had actually been facilitated. But in terms of this actual report, as you've already mentioned, quite a number of the things that we're presenting as these are things in Leicestershire. Actually, the County Council has no role, no direct role, or even in some cases, even an indirect role in delivery of some of those things. So going back to what Mr. Richardson said about affordable housing, so in my locality, which is Harborough District, actually Harborough has a very high delivery of affordable housing over the last 5 years, but that's not the same in every part of Leicestershire. So it's if we're saying that we've got a good delivery, it's not uniform across the whole of the county, and therefore, and it is reliant on the delivery in individual districts through the local plans or the planning for consents that are given, which again, county doesn't have any. Well, okay, has a slightly indirect role, some of that, but not absolutely in terms of delivery of that. So I'm just kind of curious in a way for my own sort of thing is how many of the measures that we're talking about are actual things that the county council, the decision we make here as councillors, we actually have we're steering some of the thing that happens, and some of it's absolutely got nothing to do with us, and we're not actually influencing or directing or actually spending any money, and it's just you're merely reporting kind of what else is going on, or counties just saying, oh, this is what's happening. So for example, so isn't that good or isn't that not so good? And so I'm just wondering, what's the balance between those things, and whether the report could identify that a bit clearer as to things that we actually have a direct or an indirect influence on, and things that we don't actually have any steerage on. Thank you.
Yes, just to say that there's a real continuum, you're quite right, of around the outcomes of leverage and delivery that the county council itself can control. So there's a lot of factors here in play in delivering these outcomes. The outcomes themselves were chosen obviously by the administration in terms of the strategic plan and what it wanted to achieve, and all the areas in there were aspirations that were set for the county council to contribute all its resources, officer level resources, outcome boards, etc., to try and support achievement of. So, for example, in terms of housing, the county council isn't the housing authority, but it is the transport authority. It is playing a role in the multi-agency strategic planning group. It's trying to unlock land. It's trying to put in its own development to support housing delivery at different levels. So the council is looking to support that, and therefore we do have measures, outcome measures around it to show whether the overall position is being successful. But absolutely right, take the point that a lot of the delivery in that particular one does very much rely on the district contribution to it. It's very difficult to unpick in the report and say exactly what percentage of slice there is in different bodies, particularly around health and care integration. That's very similar. So there's a number of outcomes. The environment one, similarly, a lot of bodies involved in that, the Environment Agency, parish councils, district councils, community groups. The communities one, which is very much embedded in work with communities, parish councils, particularly district councils and other partners around that, the voluntary community sector. So I think in a lot of these outcome areas, there's a lot of factors at play. So it isn't talking about particularly about the exact performance outputs of the county council services, which would be a sort of slightly different set of measures. Some of those measures are in there, but this is broadly more an outcome set of measures.
Thank you for that.
Any other member have any quick, Mr. Richardson?
We always like a few follow-ups. You mentioned about, obviously, in relation to Councillor Morgan's comments about engagement with the community. I mean, we've had workshops on that here before, and we never seem to actually move it forward. So I've suggested now for the past 8 years, I think, that if you really want statistically good figures, just pay a district council or borough to put a bin in for you. You will get 20 times more responses than you would from ringing up 100 people and make it statistically viable. I'm never quite certain if we actually do want people to actually comment on the things, because we don't actually go out of our way to give them a mechanism to comment. So I would urge you again to try bin hangers. Every district that uses bin hangers gets a massive response by using them. And it would cost you not a lot, I'm sure, to pay a district or a borough to put them out. So that's my little bit of a rant. On page 102, and I have to say this tongue in cheek, there's a lovely picture of a electric park and ride bus and about decarbonisation. Should we not say underneath, but not in the evenings or Sundays? Because we presumably only care about decarbonising Monday to Saturday in working hours, which seems somewhat strange. Now, but the one I have a real beef over is page 162, which is the figures on adults' communities about spending on adults, which we show as red. Now, the assumption is we show it as red because we spend less than anyone else. It's only red if we spend less than anyone else and our outcomes are considerably worse, which they're not. So in my point of view, that should be green, because we're providing an illustrative service, and I've argued this in adults' communities for years, but for less money. So that must be a green, it must be better. We're being an exemplar to other councils who should be spending similar amounts to us for similar outcomes. So how can we possibly be red?
Just to pick up a couple of those points, I think that's that means less money we spent. I think we are the most efficient county. I think the data supports that. So that's in many ways a good thing. So we should be sort of promoting the fact we are the most efficient council. I think where we've been most concerned over the last 2 or 3 years, and you talked about the tipping point and the level of funding of council services and the pressures that we're under. We feel now that we've gone beyond the point of being able to maintain some of the activity and outcomes that we would like to maintain, such that we're now suggesting that we're below the level of funding we need, hence the fair funding campaign. So this is really part of the fair funding campaign to say that this funding is now at a point where we can't just say, well, isn't it great? We're very efficient. We're delivering everything we want to achieve. It's saying we've got some real challenges in Leicestershire. So real outcomes we need to be working on. And now the funding is such we're not going to be able to meet those outcomes. We're going to be cutting service even further. The outcomes are going to be worsening. And it's really the fair funding issue that needs to be tackled. And it's part of that campaign. So we've ranked it red for that reason, because we don't think now moving forward, it's a question of us being efficient. But those sort of efficiencies have all been taken now. So we are at that tipping point.
If I just come back on that point, that's not strictly true, because all right, there might be some services we're not doing vis-a-vis others, and the amount of contact that elderly residents and that get with the council is less. But you can then subdivide those into different areas. So where we're providing the core service, which we continue to do, that bit should be what you made an argument for is you made an argument for it going red because we might do one little bit of it. What we should do is highlight the little bit we're not doing because we haven't got the money, but the core bit, which is the essential bit of keeping people safe and providing the service we are doing, and I firmly believe it's a green because of the way we're doing it. So I think if you're going that route, there should be subdivision and say, this is what we're giving up, which harks back to the earlier conversations we had. This is what we will no longer be able to do as money disappears. What is the impact on that resident? So it might be nice things to have. So residents might feel more isolated than they do in other council areas who've got more money to avoid that isolation. But technically, it's not a core service we have to provide. And therefore, you're rating a service as red, even though it isn't, for something which is a really nice thing to do and one I would love us to be doing, but technically we don't have to do. Yeah, I'll certainly take the point. I think there are lots of positives in the report, so I don't want to sort of
finish on a negative, if you like, around this sort of the fair funding. There's an awful lot of positive information in here around delivery, around services, around service performance. We're still, I think we're 5th overall in sort of the overall analysis. 1 or 2 areas are under pressure. So lots of positivity in this report, which needs to come through. Equally, the fair funding position, and we obviously had the budget discussion before this particular item, means that that is a really concerning position moving forwards with the pressure that Leicestershire residents are under, that some of these outcomes are under in terms of delivery. And potentially we may need to look at the strategic plan moving forwards. It's something the administration may need if the settlement in the next couple of weeks isn't as positive, as it could be. I don't know whether Zafar wants to sort of say anything around that. Zafar leads on the strategic plan, so may want to comment.
Yeah, probably a fair point. I think, given Declan and Simone's presentation, I think realistically, as an authority, plus obviously with contribution from this committee, we need to think about what we can actually deliver. Potentially an affordability test to see what is affordable, because that would influence what we can deliver. But then it may be more fundamental than that, is, do we need to temper or reduce our ambitions, or potentially some of those timescales and some of those outputs and programs that we ideally would like to do, but that either simply we can no longer do it. And as already been illustrated, we are reliant significantly on partners. So, I would say, I can't give Mr. King or Mr. Richardson an accurate percentage of how many of our delivery outcomes are with partners, but it is a significant amount. And so we are reliant on business sector districts heavily. And, if they go through a similar process to us, then, that does question a lot of what we're trying to do over the next couple of 3 to 4 years.
Does anyone else have any questions, comments on this item? No, I mean, as mentioned, we are the worst funded county in the country, and the chart between for funding for Leicestershire, probably about 120 million extra, and how much difference that would make in terms of all the problems the authority is facing. Thank you to everyone for their comments and presentations today on this item. The recommendation is we're asked to note the report which is to be presented to Cabinet, and thereafter full council. Our comments today will be reported to those meetings if we accept that recommendation. Moves on to item 12, which is the date of the next meeting. The next meeting of the Scrutiny Commission is scheduled to take place on Monday the 29th of January 2023 at 10 a.m. And item 30, as stated at the start of the meeting, there are no 29th of January 2024. At the start of the meeting, I have no urgent items. I therefore thank everyone for attending today and everyone who presented, and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.